Chapter 51-72. Everyone had expected this. They were all excited and rubbed their palms together, eager to give it a try. The trial competition is an old tradition of the Archaic Alliance. I'm sure everyone is familiar with it. However, it's the first time for some of the disciples, so I'll have to explain to everyone what the trial competition is. Shin Ijie smiled and continued, the trial competition, as the name suggests, is a preparation for the primordial trial. The purpose of this competition is to see if everyone's strength is qualified to participate in the primordial trial. This is also for everyone's safety. After all, the primordial trial is very dangerous. If you're not strong enough, you might die in vain. Martial Uncle Shin, may I know how to be considered strong enough? Could it be that there's a realm of strength? Only those who are above this realm are qualified, and those who are below this realm are not qualified to participate in the archaic trials? Someone asked impatiently. That's not the case. Even though it's simple and clear, it doesn't conform to the objective of our Primeval trials. Everyone must remember that the Primeval trials isn't a simple trial. It only exists for a single purpose, and that is to allow those disciples with true strength to distinguish themselves and become the important fostered targets of the various Primeval sects and clans. Shin Ijie paused and added, of course, the strength I'm talking about doesn't just refer to the realm. More importantly, it's also about the potential. You should know that a genius with outstanding potential, even if is only in the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, is definitely not any less valuable than a Foundation Establishment realm expert in the perfected Foundation Establishment realm. Then how do we determine the potential and talent? Do we look at the spiritual root? Everyone asked. The spiritual root is only one aspect. It's too narrow to only look at the spiritual root. After all, there are many so-called geniuses with outstanding spiritual roots but eventually become mediocre. Therefore, the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance have unanimously decided that only the disciples with outstanding performance in actual combat are the real geniuses that are worth cultivating. Shin Ijie said seriously. Actual combat? How does that work? Everyone didn't understand what was going on. Although there would always be a grand refinement competition before every primordial refinement competition, the content of every grand refinement competition would be different. In the early days, there was a time where everything was cut off, but in the recent times, there were all sorts of mutual competitions. There were internal competitions between various sects, and there were also group competitions between sects. There were all sorts of forms, and every time, it would be different. Improvisation is also an ability that must be tested. Forgive me for keeping you in suspense for the specific content of the contest. The contest will officially begin 3 days later. I'll explain it to you in detail then. You just need to go back and get yourself ready, said Shin Ijie with a smile. The people wanted to ask more, but Shin Ijie was the leader of the team after all, and he was a golden core stage expert. Since he had said so, they dared not ask further. However, Shui Jianfeng did not have such concerns. He was also a golden core stage expert now, so he did not take Shin Ijie seriously. He immediately said in a sarcastic tone, Uncle Shin, what you said sounds nice, but who knows if you will secretly reveal it to your own people in advance? I'm afraid it's not fair to everyone, right? The people were already muttering in their hearts. After being incited by him, their expressions suddenly changed. Everything else was fine, but they were worried about the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island. Shin Ijie had always had a good image, but no one would believe that he was fair and selfless without any selfishness. At least, the disciples of the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island would leak some information in advance. It did not seem to be a big deal, but one was well prepared, while the other was caught off guard. When it came to the real trial competition, their performance was very different. Even if it was just their wishful thinking, the slightest bit of unfairness would be magnified infinitely in this kind of competition and examination. Everyone would feel that they would be the victim, and eventually, the crowd would be so agitated that it would get out of hand. Shui Jianfeng, are you suspecting that I'm unfair? Shin Ijie's face darkened and he snorted coldly. No, I dare not. But I think it's better to be open and transparent about things like the trial competition, so that people won't talk behind my back and suspect me. I'm doing this for your own good, Uncle Shin. What do you guys think? Shui Jianfeng said carelessly. Yes, senior brother Shui is right. The crowd agreed in unison. The crowd was so agitated that Shin Yijie did not dare to suppress it by force. He snorted with a gloomy face and said, "Very well, you're right. But it's a pity that I still can't tell you the content of the competition, because even I don't know it yet. So far, I've only set a general tone. As for the specific competition items, the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance are still discussing it. The competition items will be sent here on time in 3 days, and we'll know then." The crowd immediately looked at each other. Since even the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance were still discussing it, there was nothing to doubt. Do you have any more questions? It's better to raise them all at once, so that some people won't gossip behind your back again. Shin Yijie looked at Shui Jianfeng and said. Shui Jianfeng had repeatedly contradicted him, the leading martial uncle. Even if he had a mild temperament, it was impossible for him to swallow his anger. His stance showed that he was going against Shui Jianfeng. If it was someone else, they would have backed off long ago. However, Shui Jianfeng did not put Shin Yijie in his eyes at all. After all, he had too many things to rely on. Not to mention that he was an early-stage gold core expert, he had the support of the deputy head of the Snowsword faction for his father. Most importantly, he had the support of this huge and mysterious organization. With his usual arrogance, it would be strange if he still respected Shin Yijie. I have another question. Does everyone in the Transit Islands have to participate in this trial competition? Shui Jianfeng opened his mouth and asked, but his eyes were on Lin Yi and the others. He did not know that Lin Yi had already made up his mind to let everyone participate in the trial competition. He was afraid that they would not take the bait. Not necessarily. The archaic trials have never forced anyone to participate. The same goes for the trial competition. It's up to the individual whether they want to participate or not. However, if they give up the trial competition, it's equivalent to giving up the opportunity to participate in the archaic trials, Shin Yijie said indifferently. The answer was not surprising, but it made Shui Jianfeng's face a little pale. The plan that he proposed to the bespectacled doctor had the most basic premise, which was that Lin Yi and the others had to participate in the trial competition. Otherwise, he would be helpless. However, this was different from the mining at the bottom of the sea. After all, to the people present, participating in the trial competition was not an unacceptable obligation. Instead, it was a privilege that most people yearned for from the bottom of their hearts. Chapter 5173. After thinking about it, Shui Jianfeng had no choice but to say, the primordial trial this time is a rare event that happens once in 1,000 years. I've long heard about how good it is, but I don't know if the rumors are true or not. Why don't you take this opportunity to tell us about it, Uncle Master Shin? Shin Yijie frowned and looked at Shui Jianfeng strangely. What is this guy talking about? What is he trying to do? Seeing Shin Yijie's indifferent expression, Shui Jianfeng couldn't help but secretly spit. However, he had no other way to lure Lin Yi and the others. Since he couldn't threaten them, he could only tempt them with benefits. He quickly coughed and winked at Bing Wuqing. With Bing Wuqing's character, of course, she wouldn't do such a boring thing with him. However, she remembered that the bespectacled doctor had told her that Shui Jianfeng would be in charge of everything related to the trial competition. Therefore, even he couldn't be too disrespectful, or he would be suspected. Elder Shin, I don't know much about this, and I believe everyone is the same. Why don't we satisfy everyone's curiosity? Bing Wuqing could only bite the bullet and play along. That's right. Since the trial competition is a preparation for the primordial trial, it's reasonable to explain the uniqueness of the primordial trial in advance. At least everyone will have an idea. Uncle Master Shin, you're the Uncle Master leading the team. This is also your responsibility, isn't it? Shui Jianfeng hurriedly rephrased his words again. That's right, Martial Uncle Shin, please tell us about it. The others were also mobilized. At this point, Shin Yijie had no choice but to say it. Moreover, it wasn't a secret, so it was not a bad idea to satisfy everyone's curiosity. Alright, but this trial ground only happens once in 1,000 years. I only have a rough idea, and it's not accurate. Just take it as a reference for everyone. Shin Ijie pondered for a while, then said, any place that can be chosen as a trial ground will definitely have treasures of heaven and earth. This trial ground will definitely have more treasures than other places. However, at the same time, the number of guardian beasts and various dangerous factors will also increase. Everyone should be mentally prepared for this. Everyone nodded and hurriedly asked, what are the special benefits of this trial ground? Marshal Uncle Shin, please tell us in detail. As far as I know, the most eye-catching place in this trial ground is a river called the River of Divine Sense. As the name suggests, you can refine your divine sense by staying in it. I believe I don't need to explain the benefits, said Shin Ijie. River of Divine Knowledge. Everyone's eyes brightened. The Archaic Alliance had always attached great importance to the cultivation of divine sense, and there were very few places that could temper divine sense in the entire ancient Jianghu. Moreover, all of them were in the hands of the 4 great sects and clans. Aside from their core disciples, no one else could get close. They didn't expect that there would be a divine sense river in this trial ground. It was truly worthy of being a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity. Not only the crowd, but even Lin Yi couldn't help but feel refreshed. He didn't pay much attention to the cultivation of divine sense in the past, but his mentality was completely different now. It was not only because he was now a primordial spirit, but more importantly, he was increasingly aware of the importance of the cultivation of divine sense. If one's physical strength was the hardware, then the cultivation of the primordial spirit was the software. The two complemented each other and couldn't be dispensed with. It didn't matter when his realm was still low, but when he reached his current realm, he was about to break through to the magnet realm. If the cultivation of the primordial spirit was still so weak, it would be like losing one of his 2 legs. How could he walk? When his primordial spirit was projected back to the secular world, it was already a rare surprise for Lin Yi to get the star ink charcoal from Leng Leng. He didn't expect that there would be a divine sense river in the ancient trial ground. It was a great opportunity. Previously, he only wanted to explore the ancient Jianghu. Now that he heard Shin Ijie's words, he suddenly felt excited. Not only that, legend has it that the River of Divine Sense can not only refine divine sense, but there are also unparalleled treasures buried in the river. Shin Ijie sighed. Treasures? What treasures? Everyone's curiosity was piqued. I don't know about this. If you're interested, you can try it yourself when you get there. Shin Ijie smiled faintly. Great. Since the legend is so magical, it must be a peerless treasure. By then, we'll use our own skills to get it. Shui Jianfeng took the opportunity to instigate. Senior brother Shui, you're right. Everyone agreed in unison. Shin Ijie smiled without saying a word. Although he didn't know what treasures it was, since the legend was passed down after 1,000 years, it was obvious that the treasures must be extraordinary. How could a random disciple in the foundation building stage possess it? Putting aside whether these people had the opportunity and luck, even if they did encounter it, it was hard to tell whether it would be a blessing or a curse. They might even lose their lives. They really didn't know their limits. However, as the junior uncle leading the team, it was not appropriate for him to say these words. Anyway, everyone was just fantasizing. It was not worthwhile to dampen their enthusiasm for such a small matter. While everyone was feeling excited, Shui Jianfeng had been observing the reactions of Lin Yi and the others. In contrast, he was much colder, especially Lin Yi, who did not say a word. He did not seem to be moved at all. Shui Jianfeng muttered to himself, he's still not taking the bait. This guy is quite calm. Therefore, he thought about it and said deliberately, since there are so many benefits in the Archean trials, naturally, only the disciples of the Archean Alliance can participate. Those unrelated people in the secular world don't have this qualification, right? This. Shin Ijie looked at Lin Yi awkwardly. He did not know what Lin Yi meant, so it was not appropriate for him to respond in public. Lin Yi was speechless. Shui Jianfeng's little trick was too obvious and low-level. However, since he had already decided to bring everyone to participate in the Archean trials, he could only go along with him and said, so what you're saying is that we can't participate? That's not necessarily true. However, Junior Uncle Shin just said that if anyone doesn't participate in the trials, it means that they have given up on the Archean trials. I don't care about anything else, but I'm afraid that some people will enter through the back door. Xue Jianfeng sneered. As soon as he said this, everyone looked at Lin Yi and the others with suspicious eyes. They could not even tolerate a little bit of unfairness, let alone Lin Yi and the others entering through the back door. Chapter 5174. Lin Yi was waiting for Xue Jianfeng to say that. He smiled. All right, it's just a test. We'll participate. That's more like it. Only then did Xue Jianfeng smile in satisfaction. The rest didn't matter. To him, as long as Lin Yi and the others could participate in the competition, his plan would be halfway to success. All right, we've said what we need to say. Go back and prepare yourselves, Xin Yijie announced. Everyone dispersed to rest and prepare for the competition in 3 days. Lin Yi, on the other hand, gathered Lingshan and the others together. There's only 3 days left, but as the saying goes, sharpening a spear at the last minute isn't the fastest, but it'll still help. Otherwise, the competition won't be easy to fool. Boss, it's only 3 days, isn't it too late? Chen Tian smiled bitterly. It's not late, not at all. Lin Yi smiled and said to everyone, as long as you remember what I'm about to teach you, I don't know if it'll be useful for anything else, but it should be useful for the upcoming competition. What is it? 3 days. The group asked curiously. Haha, it's nothing profound. Do you still remember the summary of the practitioner's arts I received a few days ago? Lin Yi smiled. Yes, but those are the arts of the sects on Sky Class Island, right? What's the use? Lingshan asked curiously. Judging from the North Island's Blue Cloud sect and other clues, Sky Class Island and the immemorial small Jianghu are inextricably linked. The same sects in these two places practice basically the same mental cultivation. So although this is a summary of the mental cultivation of the sects in Sky Class Island, it can also be said to be a summary of the mental cultivation of the immemorial sects. Lin Yi explained. The group nodded, but they were still confused. What does that have to do with the test? It's simple. Since we have the arts of the sects, we can use it to figure out the fighting style of the disciples and grasp their strengths and weaknesses. From there, we can come up with the most effective strategy. I've also created some counter moves while studying the manuals, Lin Yi said. Counter moves? The group's eyes lit up. That's right, there aren't many. Each sect only has 2 or 3 moves, and they're not complicated, simple and practical. If you guys can learn these moves in 3 days, the benefits will be obvious. Lin Yi nodded. Fuck. Boss, you're not just making us cram at the last minute, you're bringing a cheat sheet with you. If we learn all of this, we'll be able to beat the disciples of the ancient sects in the tests. Chen Tian said happily. That's not necessarily the case. In order for the counter moves I've taught you to be effective, you need to have a certain level of strength. If the opponent's strength is too much higher than yours, then it won't be effective. But if that's the case, there's no point thinking about it. It's better to just surrender. Lin Yi smiled and said, all right, time's running out. Let's start. All right. Everyone replied in unison. 3 days later, everyone on the transit islands gathered again, including Xin Yijie. Everyone was staring at the teleportation formation eagerly. Finally, a white light flashed, and a scroll appeared in the portal. Xin Yijie opened it immediately, and the rules of the test were written on it. Xin Yijie looked through the entire document and nodded while stroking his beard. He then announced, everyone, listen carefully. What I'm about to say is the rules of this trial. If you miss a word, it'll be your loss. Yes, the group listened attentively. First, the test will be divided into 8 teams. Those below Foundation Establishment will be in 1 team. Early Stage Foundation Establishment, Peak Early Stage Foundation Establishment, Mid Stage Foundation Establishment, Peak Mid Stage Foundation Establishment, Late Stage Foundation Establishment, Peak Late Stage Foundation Establishment, and Perfect Stage Foundation Establishment will be in their own team. Everyone, please take your seats. Now, please get into your teams, Xin Yijie ordered, and the group began to line up according to their strength. At this moment, no one would play any tricks. Firstly, they did not know the intention of such a team. Secondly, there were no secrets between the brothers in the sect. They knew each other's strength and realm clearly. Moreover, Shin Ijie, a gold core stage master, was watching them. It was impossible to fool them even if they wanted to. Lin Yi gave the group a look, and Lingshan and the others nodded. Walking into the group of early phase foundations, this caused quite a commotion. A lot of people didn't realize that they'd all succeeded, thinking that they were still Sky Class full mastery. But they were just surprised for a moment, not really taking Lingshan and the others seriously. After all, even if they succeeded in their foundation establishment, they were just the weakest early stage. They posed no threat to Archaic Alliance disciples, so naturally, they didn't have to worry about them. As for Lin Yi himself, while he was the elder master of the Green Cloud sect, that identity was only useful in front of people like Shin Ijie. The Archaic Alliance didn't recognize that. Being able to recognize him as a member of the Archaic Alliance was already giving face to the Green Cloud sect. If he wanted to participate in the Archaic test, he had to pass the test like everyone else. Lin Yi didn't mind at all. He walked into the group of perfect stage practitioners. No one below Golden Core would be his match, no matter what the test was. But there was one exception. It was Xue Jianfeng, who was smiling coldly at the side. This guy had been following the professor's orders and didn't show his strength. On the surface, he was still a perfect stage practitioner. He couldn't help but feel that it was a pity. If it weren't for the strict order from above not to touch Lin Yi, he would have killed Lin Yi to avenge himself. I can't kill him, but this is a fair opportunity. I can use this chance to beat him up. Even the higher-ups can't say anything about it, Xue Jianfeng thought. In the blink of an eye, everyone had lined up. Only two people stood outside. One was Shin Ijie, and the other was Bing Wuqing. While they weren't the leader, they were still Golden Core practitioners. There was no point in them participating in the test. Alright, I will now announce the rules of the test. It's simple. Every team will draw lots to fight each other. There will be a round every 2 days for 10 consecutive days, and there will be a total of 5 rounds. As long as you win 3 rounds, you'll automatically qualify for the test, Shin Ijie announced. Chapter 5175. On the other hand, if one couldn't even win 3 matches, then no matter how superior one's spirit root was, it would be meaningless. There were indeed times when a genius would be buried, but if one couldn't even win 3 out of 5 matches, then he would be a complete piece of trash, and it would be meaningless to talk about anything else. After observing the crowd's reaction, Shin Ijie continued, of course, this rule only applies to most of the ordinary disciples. For those genius disciples with extraordinary strength, other than winning 3 out of 5 battles, there's another easier option, which is to challenge someone of a higher level. Challenge someone of a higher level? Everyone was shocked. This was something unimaginable for ordinary disciples, but it was also the label of a genius disciple. Those who could challenge someone of a higher level were not easy to deal with. Naturally, they were considered as genius disciples. That's right. You can challenge anyone of a higher level. There's no limit to the number of times, and the other party can't refuse. As long as one of you can succeed once, then you won't have to participate in the regular competition and will automatically qualify for the trial. Shin Ijie nodded. Everyone's expressions were different. Apart from the normal rules, there was also a special rule. This grand competition was well thought out. It was clear that the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance attached great importance to this. Because of this, they had to think of a way to perform well. This wasn't just related to the Prime Val smelting trials, it was also related to their future in the Archaic Alliance. Marshal Uncle Shin, may I ask, what will happen if you can't challenge someone of a higher level, or win 3 out of 5 battles in the regular competition? Everyone couldn't help but be worried. That means you don't qualify for the trial. You'll be sent back to the Archaic Underworld after the trial in the secular world. Of course, even if you win 3 out of 5 battles, you have to break through to the Foundation Establishment realm before the Archaic Trials begins. Otherwise, you'll be automatically removed from the Archaic Alliance, and naturally, you won't be qualified to participate in the Archaic Trials. Shin Ijie explained. As soon as this was said, everyone looked at each other. According to Shin Ijie's explanation, Wouldn't it mean that half of the people would be eliminated? Even though the grand competition would be held in the Primeval trials in the past, and some people would be eliminated every single time, it would at most be a formality, and some people at the bottom of the rankings would be eliminated. There had never been a precedent of half of the people being eliminated. After all, the grand competition was only the prelude to the Primeval trials, and it wasn't the Primeval competition, so how could it be so serious? Marshal Uncle Shin, this is the grand competition and not the primordial grand competition. There's no need to go so far, right? It's not normal. However, the primordial trial this time is a once-in-a-thousand-years event. The degree of danger is far more than usual. It's reasonable for the trial competition to be stricter. This is to be responsible for your safety, Shin Ijie said seriously. But if it's really for safety reasons, it's better to let us, the stronger disciples, go. There's no need to make it so complicated, right? The one who spoke was a late Foundation Establishment disciple. The other stronger disciples of the Archaic Alliance echoed him, all of them filled with righteous indignation. Now, with the rules of 3 wins out of 5 duels, the biggest victims were none other than them. Disciples like them who were at the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm or even higher should have the qualifications to participate in the Primeval trials. However, once this rule was announced, even amongst them, a group of people would inevitably be eliminated. Think about it, if even dignified disciples at the peak of the Foundation Establishment realm didn't have the chance to participate in the Primeval trials, wouldn't they become the laughingstock of others if word of this got out? This is the unanimous decision of the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance. Do any of you have any objections? Shin Ijie's words stunned everyone. No matter how dissatisfied they would never dare to go against the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance. Otherwise, not only would their future be in danger, they might even lose their lives. Moreover, although they were not weak, the ones who were really dissatisfied with this rule were only those disciples who were at the bottom of the same level. The truly outstanding core disciples of each sect would not care about this little difficulty. To put it bluntly, only the weak would complain like this. Since they were the weak, how could they have the confidence to go against the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance? If it were Bing Wuching, facing these people's complaints, she would at most snort coldly and would not even bother to explain. However, Shin Ijie was much more honest. Seeing that everyone seemed to be dissatisfied, he thought about it and decided to explain a little. I've already said that the purpose of this trial competition is to select disciples who have both strength and potential. Moreover, the rules of the competition are not that strict. If you really meet the requirements, it won't be difficult to qualify for the trials. However, if you only have the level but no potential, then there's nothing much to say. Instead of going to the Primeval trials and hindering other disciples with more potential, it's better for you to return to the Primeval Jianghu as soon as possible, said Shin Ijie. His words were not very pleasant to hear, but it was the truth. From the perspective of each Primeval sect, the value of a disciple with Foundation Establishment consummation at the bottom was far less than that of a disciple with outstanding aptitude in the early stage of Foundation Establishment consummation. However, if these two people were to go to the Primeval trials at the same time, the disciple with Foundation Establishment consummation would definitely benefit. After all, under normal circumstances, a disciple in the early stage of Foundation Establishment consummation would not be a match for a disciple with Foundation Establishment consummation. Therefore, it would easily lead to a situation that would be extremely troublesome for the higher-ups of all Primeval sects. In the Primeval trials, those talented disciples with outstanding aptitude who were worthy of being nurtured would find it difficult to advance. Instead, their opportunities would be snatched away by high-level disciples with no potential at the bottom. However, even the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance could not force that only those talented disciples could obtain the opportunities. Even if the other disciples were of a higher level and stronger strength, they had to stand aside. If such an inhumane rule was really announced, many ordinary disciples would have long rebelled. That was why there was such an unprecedented rule. Not only could it be used to select outstanding disciples of different levels, but it could also be used to eliminate those mediocre disciples who only had high levels but were actually at the bottom. It could be said that it was killing two birds with one stone to clear the obstacles for those talented disciples who were truly worthy of being nurtured. At this point, even if everyone was unwilling in their hearts, they didn't dare say anything more. After all, the matter had already been decided, and it would be useless no matter how much they grumbled. Instead, it would bring trouble to themselves, so it was better to make use of this time to properly plan for the upcoming grand competition. Chapter 51-76. Everyone looked at each other, and no one spoke for a while. Challenging someone of a higher level was no small matter, not to mention that the bird that sticks out gets shot first. In this kind of situation, whoever was the first to step out to challenge someone of a higher level would be in the limelight, but at the same time, they would also be under a great deal of pressure. This was especially true for the high-level disciple they challenged. He would definitely go all out. Otherwise, if he was defeated by someone of a higher level in front of everyone, he would not be able to face anyone in the future. Lin Yi was a foundation perfection practitioner, and he was already the highest level in the tournament. Naturally, there was no such thing as challenging someone of a higher level. As for Ling Shan and the others, they were only at foundation establishment not long ago, and naturally wouldn't think of challenging someone of a higher level. As a result, they waited patiently for the lots to be drawn. Half an hour passed, and still no one stood out to challenge someone of a higher level. Shin Yijie coughed dryly and was about to announce the draw when someone finally spoke up. "Uncle Shin, why don't I try?" The crowd went into an uproar at the words, and all eyes focused on a young man. He had delicate features, and a calm aura around him. He looked like he had nothing to do with the world, but if one looked closely, they would realize that there was an indescribable aura hidden within his calmness. Even Lin Yi couldn't help but sigh to himself. This kid was extraordinary. "Ling Tianyu of the Thousand Blades sect, who would you like to challenge?" Shin Yijie asked. Facing this Ling Tianyu, even he, as the leader of the group, didn't dare to be careless. One had to know that this kid was the young master of the Thousand Blades sect, and this wasn't as simple as being a second-generation practitioner. Ever since the previous head of the Thousand Blades sect died in the hands of a heretic, Ling Tianyu had become the head of the Thousand Blades sect at a young age. Even though he was only at the peak of the late phase of foundation establishment, he still received the support of the entire sect. This was not only because he had the bloodline of the former sect master, but also because the ancient Jianghu was a world where strength was respected. Without strength, bloodline inheritance was just a joke. The reason why Ling Tianyu was able to gain the recognition of the Thousand Blades faction with his cultivation at the peak of the late foundation establishment realm was naturally not because of absolute strength, but because of his incomparable talent. It was rumored that the strongest foundation establishment cultivator of the Archaic Alliance was Xue Jianfeng of the Snowsword faction, but that was only because Xue Jianfeng was very high profile. On the other hand, as the young master of the Thousand Blades faction, Ling Tianyu was extremely low-key and rarely fought with others. Only the inner disciples of the Thousand Blades faction knew a thing or two about him. If the two of them really had a chance to fight, it would be very difficult to say who would win. On the contrary, more people would favor Yin Tianyu, as he was the uncrowned king. Hehe, this will be interesting. Ling Tianyu will definitely challenge Xue Jianfeng. This is the battle for the #1 foundation establishment cultivator of the Ancient Alliance. Everyone couldn't help but be excited. Ling Tianyu was an expert at the peak of the late foundation establishment realm. He could only challenge those at the peak of the foundation establishment realm, and his representative was Xue Jianfeng. Who was stronger between Xue Jianfeng and Ling Tianyu? This was a point that had been debated endlessly. It was a pity that the two of them had never met each other. Now, they could finally have a showdown in front of everyone. It seemed that this kid really wanted to challenge him. Xue Jianfeng muttered to himself. To be honest, if he was still an expert at the peak of the foundation establishment realm, he might really be a little afraid. After all, Ling Tianyu was no small matter. But now that he was at the early gold core realm, there was nothing to worry about. No matter how powerful Ling Tianyu was, could he, as a mere peak of the late foundation establishment realm, challenge an early gold core realm? What a joke. Martial Uncle Shin, the person I want to challenge is him. Ling Tianyu smiled slightly and his gaze fell on a person. This time, The crowd was in an uproar again. The person he wanted to challenge was not Shui Jianfeng, but Lin Yi. You want to challenge me? Lin Yi was also a little stunned. Yes, this should be fine, right? Ling Tianyu confirmed with his trademark gentle smile on his face. Yes. Xin Yijie nodded. He didn't know why Ling Tianyu suddenly wanted to challenge Lin Yi, but according to the rules of the competition, there was no problem. Moreover, Lin Yi couldn't refuse. Can I ask why you chose me? Lin Yi asked curiously. It was not strange for someone like Ling Tianyu to take the path of challenging those at a higher level. But instead of those disciples of the Archaic Alliance, he chose him. Did he think that he was a pushover? Forgive me for being presumptuous, but I am purely curious. Ling Tianyu nodded slightly. Curious? That's a little interesting. Lin Yi couldn't help but be amused. He turned to Xin Yijie and said, Then can we start now? Yes, we can. Only after the challenge is over will we start the competition by drawing lots. Xin Yijie nodded and then reminded in a low voice, Martial uncle, this Ling Tianyu is not to be trifled with. You must be careful. If you lose to someone at a higher level, not only will you lose face, you will also lose the qualification to participate in the competition. Although this sentence was not said clearly, everyone knew that it was the truth. In this grand competition, even disciples who were at a disadvantage in a battle of the same level would be disqualified. If they were defeated by someone who was a level higher than them, then there was no need to say anything more. I know. Lin Yi smiled indifferently. This Ling Tianyu seemed a little unfathomable. Unfortunately, he was an existence comparable to a magnet realm expert. No matter how strong Ling Tianyu's aptitude was, he was just a seedling in Lin Yi's eyes. There was really nothing to worry about. Challenging someone of a higher level would attract a lot of attention, and everyone retreated to the side, leaving Lin Yi and Ling Tianyu alone. Then, sorry for offending you. Ling Tianyu cupped his hands with a smile, and then slowly took out a silk belt from his bosom in front of everyone. Everyone was puzzled. Could this silk belt be his weapon? This Ling Tianyu is said to be a god. Why would he use such a sissy weapon? Everyone couldn't help but look at each other. That's right. Our Archaic Alliance has always attached importance to weapons, and all the cultivation of the Thousand Blades faction is based on weapons. As the young master of the Thousand Blades faction, Ling Tianyu should have inherited a divine weapon. Why would he use a sissy silk belt? It doesn't look like a big deal. Someone frowned and muttered. Not only them, but even Bing Wuqing, Shui Jianfeng, and Xin Yijie were staring at the ribbon fluttering in the air. They were all experts in the gold core stage, but none of them would underestimate Ling Tianyu. After all, he was someone who could become the leader of the Thousand Blades sect. Chapter 51-77. As far as the disciples of the Thousand Blades faction were concerned, even ordinary disciples in the Foundation establishment realm could control more than a dozen weapons at the same time. Those with better aptitude could control dozens of weapons at the same time. However, it was very difficult for them to advance further. When they reached the nascent soul realm, they could at most control 100 weapons at the same time. Lin Yi had only roughly studied the Thousand Blades sect's practitioner's arts, but he knew where the difficulties lay. The biggest difficulty lay in multitasking. Controlling each weapon required a part of one's attention, and it wasn't easy for a normal person to do two things at the same time. Controlling 100 weapons at the same time required 100 multitasking. Even an idiot could figure out how difficult this was. It was definitely at an inhuman level. However, the Ling Tianyu in front of him was puzzling. He did not show a lot of weapons like the other disciples of the Thousand Blades faction. Instead, he only showed a ribbon that seemed to be harmless. What did this mean? Was he hiding his strength? Or was this inconspicuous ribbon his trump card? Lin Yi did not move. He just stood there quietly, waiting for Ling Tianyu's next move. At his level, it was impossible for him to treat the other party as a real threat. However, he would not underestimate the enemy. He was observing Ling Tianyu and coping with all changes by remaining unchanged. While Lin Yi was observing Ling Tianyu was also observing his reaction. As he said, he was indeed very curious about Lin Yi. A powerful primordial spirit expert, the martial granduncle of the Blue Cloud sect in the North Island, Lin Yi was a mystery to all the disciples of the primordial age. Although Ling Tianyu had not made any moves in the past 10 months, he felt that it was necessary to understand Lin Yi's background in both the short and long term. Otherwise, there would be one more uncontrollable factor in the upcoming primordial trial. Suddenly, the ribbon that was fluttering in the air became taut with a swish. Then, with a piercing sound, it shot toward Lin Yi like a sharp arrow. Everyone's expression changed when they saw this. To be able to have such power, it seemed that this ribbon was indeed not an ordinary item. Facing the ribbon that was rushing toward him, Lin Yi was still unmoved. Until the ribbon was less than half a foot away from him, he stretched out 2 fingers and calmly clamped it. Xin Yijie nodded secretly. This scene seemed ordinary, but it was not easy to be as calm as Lin Yi. At least, no one present could do it. Even he, a master in the early stage of Gold Core Realm, dared not guarantee it. However, the ribbon did not stop after being clamped. Instead, it wriggled wildly like a snake. But in the eyes of others, it was just a futile struggle. After all, how could a soft ribbon do any damage? However, Lin Yi's expression changed. He chose to let go of it without hesitation. Almost at the same time when he let go, a large number of flying needles suddenly shot out from the ribbon. This scene was so sudden that everyone present gasped and looked horrified. Almost all of them were deceived by the inconspicuous shape of the ribbon. They did not expect that there were so many flying needles hidden in the ribbon. If it had been them, they would have already been pierced by the flying needles and died without a burial ground with just one move. It was a pity that Ling Tianyu was facing Lin Yi. Even if these flying needles were hidden very well and almost integrated with the ribbon, it was difficult to be detected by the divine sense under normal circumstances. However, Lin Yi not only had a far more sensitive divine sense than ordinary people, but also a beast-like sense of danger. If he did not detect them in advance, how could he suddenly let go of the ribbon? What a powerful movement technique! Ling Tianyu's eyes brightened. What shocked him was not that Lin Yi could detect them in advance, but that Lin Yi could calmly dodge the sudden attack of the flying needles at such a close distance and come out unscathed. With Ling Tianyu's identity, his sparring partners in the Thousand Blades sect were at least in the Gold Core stage. However, even if they were experts in the Gold Core stage, they could at most block his flying needles with their protective genuine chi. No one had ever been able to dodge it completely like Lin Yi. Such a movement technique was simply unheard of and unseen. Likewise, to be able to practice the legendary flying blades of 1,000 blades, Your Excellency, is also not simple. Lin Yi smiled faintly. Flying blades of 1,000 blades. Hearing this, everyone was shocked again. They carefully counted the number of flying needles flying in the air at this moment. Only then did they exclaim in shock, 999 flying needles and that ribbon. It really is a flying blades of 1,000 blade. How is this possible? Isn't the 1,000 blades flying together just an illusory legend? Ling Tianyu can actually do it. Even though they had seen it with their own eyes, they still felt it was incredible. One had to know that the 100 blades simultaneous release was already very impressive. Even the experts of the 1,000 blades faction had to be at least nascent soul realm old monsters to be able to do it. Multitasking wasn't something that could be practiced just because one wanted to. If one didn't have enough aptitude, it would be useless even if one practiced for thousands of years. As for the 1,000 blades simultaneous release, that required one to multitask 1,000 times. The difficulty was more than 10,000 times that of multitasking. This wasn't something that humans could do. But the truth was right in front of them. Ling Tianyu, who was merely at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, had managed to achieve the legendary 1,000 blades flying together. Was he even human? No wonder everyone in the 1,000 Blades sect supports him to be the sect leader. He's such an amazing genius. No wonder. Xin Yijie finally understood. Regarding the matter of Ling Tianyu becoming the sect leader of the 1,000 Blades sect, the entire Archaic Alliance had different guesses, including the higher-ups of the various archaic sects and families. No matter how talented he was, it was too childish to let Ling Tianyu, who was only at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, become the sect leader of a sect. But now that he had seen the 1,000 blades flying together with his own eyes, Shin Ijie finally understood that the 1,000 Blades sect was not stupid. Instead, it was because they had found a powerful backer. Once this Ling Tianyu grew up, no one in the entire Archaic Alliance would be his opponent. At that time, the 1,000 Blades sect would definitely sweep away the declining trend and have a promising future. Not only Shin Ijie, but even Bing Wuqing, who was next to him, was moved. Ling Tianyu, who had achieved the 1,000 blades flying together, could not be measured by common sense. Even if he was only at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, he was enough to be on an equal footing with experts in the gold core stage. If time passed, even they would have to look up to him. Chapter 5178. He had always thought that he was worthy of his title as the #1 in the Foundation establishment realm and could suppress Ling Tianyu. Now that he thought about it, it was really ridiculous. In front of the 1,000 flying blades, he, the so-called #1 in the Foundation establishment realm, was nothing. No, this Ling Tianyu must be eliminated while he was still young. Otherwise, he would definitely be a great trouble in the future. Although he was proud, Xue Jianfeng was not a fool. It was true that he was an early-stage gold core realm expert, had a father who was the deputy head of the Snowsword faction, and had a mysterious and powerful backer in the center. But all of these were nothing in front of Ling Tianyu's 1,000 flying blades. Such a threat must be nipped in the bud. Your Excellency has good eyesight. I admire you. Ling Tianyu was slightly taken aback. He didn't expect Lin Yi's observation skills to be so sharp that he could count the number of flying needles in an instant. If it wasn't for his reminder, the others might not have realized this so quickly. You're too polite. I didn't expect to see the glory of the 1,000 flying blades today. The Archaic Alliance is really full of talents. But it's a pity. Lin Yi shook his head meaningfully. What's a pity? Ling Tianyu looked at him and asked. Everyone present was also curious. This was the legendary 1,000 flying blades. What was there to pity about? Of course it's a pity that your current realm is too low. Given time, you can indeed become an expert. As for now, you're still far from that level, Lin Yi said bluntly in front of everyone. Everyone looked at him, thinking that this guy really knew how to show off. They didn't know that what Lin Yi said was the truth. Ling Tianyu's 1,000 flying blades was indeed real, but his 1,000 flying blades were all insignificant flying needles. All of them added up didn't even weigh half a jin. Even if it was the 1,000 flying blades, it was only the weakest version. It was fine to scare others, but it was unrealistic to scare Lin Yi. Moreover, with the strength of Lin Yi's body, let alone the weakest version, even if the 1,000 flying blades were real divine weapons, he would at most be a formidable opponent. How could he be scared? Really? Then I'll have to ask for your guidance. Although Ling Tianyu still had a gentle expression on his face, he was, after all, the young master of the 1,000 Blades sect, a supreme figure who had mastered the flying blades technique. It would be strange if his arrogance wasn't provoked by Lin Yi's words. Go ahead. Lin Yi smiled faintly and made a gesture of invitation. However, in the eyes of the people around him, it was pure pretentiousness. Ling Tianyu's expression froze. His 10 fingers moved slightly, and the 999 flying needles floating in the air instantly condensed on the ribbon. The ribbon twisted back and forth, and the tip twisted into the shape of a snake's head. At first glance, it looked exactly like a hydralisk with long thorns all over its body. The hydralisk danced rapidly in the air, whistling fiercely. Its momentum was terrifying, and the onlookers could not help but tremble with fear. Even Shin Ijie, a master in the early stage of Gold Core, felt his eyelids twitching. Only Lin Yi, who was in the field, was not in a hurry. Instead, the corner of his mouth slightly raised to reveal a playful smile. After hovering for a moment, the hydralisk suddenly pounced on Lin Yi from behind. Its speed was extremely fast, but Lin Yi was faster. He easily dodged it with a flash. It's only Marshal Granduncle. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't be able to dodge this attack. Shin Ijie commented. This was not a compliment to Lin Yi, but the truth. The attack of the hydralisk was so fast that even with his body movement, it was impossible for him to avoid it easily. Looking at the whole field, There was no other person except Lin Yi. No matter how fast your body movement is, can you avoid the divine dragon's tail whip? Ling Tianyu was extremely confident. The hydralisk was covered with flying needles. In the face of such an attack, ordinary people's first reaction was not to face it head-on. They were not only afraid of pain, but also afraid of poison. Therefore, Lin Yi's response was completely within his expectation. The hydralisk was more than 3 feet long, and it had already surrounded Lin Yi. Therefore, no matter how Lin Yi dodged, it was impossible for him to avoid this long-prepared move. Divine Dragon's Tail Whip. Lin Yi smiled and released a murderous aura of the 5 elements. Why don't we see whose dragon is more powerful? The dragon roared, and the murderous aura of the 5 elements immediately met the hydralisk. Then, with a loud bang, the hydralisk was torn into pieces, and the flying needles fell to the ground. How could this be? Ling Tianyu couldn't help but turn pale. He was very confident in his move. Even an expert in the early stage of Gold Core Realm said that it was difficult to deal with the Divine Dragon's Tail Whip. He didn't expect that it would be easily broken by Lin Yi. Moreover, it was a domineering way of meeting force with force. More importantly, it was only a stream of genuine qi. How could there be such a terrifying genuine qi in the world? Was this person really only at the peak of Foundation establishment? Only Lin Yi himself was not surprised. No matter how powerful the 1,000 blades flying together was, could it be more powerful than the murderous aura of the 5 elements? There is always someone better than you. There is nothing strange about this, right? Lin Yi smiled faintly and said, if the 1,000 blades flying together only has this little strength, it is too disappointing. In his view, the hydralisk that Ling Tianyu made was not ordinary. At first glance, it seemed to be in line with the principle that the weapons of the 1,000 blades sect complemented each other. But this principle was only for ordinary disciples. For a genius like Ling Tianyu, it was too mediocre. If the legendary 1,000 blades flying together was really used in this way, it would be useless. Really? My skills are not good enough. I have embarrassed myself in front of you. Ling Tianyu looked as calm as usual at this time, without the slightest hint of worry. However, the movements of his hands did not stop at all. After the flying needles fell, they did not recondense on the ribbon. Instead, they simply formed their own formation. At first glance, they looked like a dense swarm of bees. Although the attacks between them seemed messy, they cooperated with each other, as if there was some kind of profound military strategy. Oh! Arrangement. This is a little interesting. Lin Yi controlled the murderous aura of the 5 elements to deal with these flying needles with great interest. The more he fought, the more shocked he became. This Ling Tianyu's talent was really very high. In terms of power, although the flying needles were far inferior to the hydralisk, they had become more difficult to deal with now that they had broken up into smaller groups. Just a little interesting. Ling Tianyu smiled. Before his voice died away, the swarm of flying needle bees, which had been big and small just a moment ago, became even more scattered. Almost every flying needle was fighting on its own. The power of each attack became weaker, but at the same time, it became more frequent and harder to guard against. Chapter 5179. If these flying needles were poisoned, Lin Yi would have been a corpse long ago. Xue Jianfeng sneered at the scene. For him, both Lin Yi and Ling Tianyu were targets that had to be eliminated. Unfortunately, because of the order from the higher-ups of the center, he did not have the guts to touch Lin Yi at all. Ling Tianyu was the lifeblood of the 1,000 Blades faction. If he touched this guy, the entire 1,000 Blades faction would have to fight him to the death. With his current strength, it was tantamount to setting himself on fire. Humph, the 1,000 Blades faction used to be one of the 4 major sects and families. Although it has declined now, it is still a decent faction. As the head of the 1,000 Blades faction, how could Ling Tianyu use such insidious and despicable means? Xin Yijie glanced at Xue Jianfeng disdainfully. A gentleman would not do such a thing, but it was obvious that Xue Jianfeng did not feel any pressure at all. Xue Jianfeng snorted disdainfully. If it was in the past, he would still care about his image, but after being crippled twice, his temperament had changed greatly. Especially now that he was secretly relying on the center, he would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. Sinister methods like poison were naturally not a problem. At this time, Bing Wuqing suddenly said, "Even if the needles are really poisoned, Ling Tianyu cannot hurt Lin Yi at all." What? Everyone was shocked when they heard this. After a closer look, they finally found that although the 999 flying needles of Ling Tianyu had surrounded Lin Yi so tightly that it was impossible to defend against them, so far, Lin Yi had not been pierced by a single needle. 90% of the flying needles were dodged by Lin Yi's body movement. As for the remaining 10%, every time they got close to Lin Yi, they were blocked by his protective genuine qi and could not advance an inch, let alone cause any damage. What a strong protective genuine qi! Everyone was shocked. At the level of Foundation establishment consummation, the strength of the protective genuine qi was indeed strong enough to block ordinary punches, palms, and blunt weapons. But Ling Tianyu's flying needles were almost the natural enemy of protective genuine qi. It only took 1% of protective genuine qi to defend against ordinary attacks, but 10% of protective genuine qi was needed to defend against flying needles. Lin Yi was just a peak Foundation establishment expert. He wasn't even a golden core stage expert, so how could his protective qi be so strong? TSK, no matter how strong his protective zhen qi is, what's the point? Even if Lin Yi can hold on for a while, he won't be able to withstand it for long. Sooner or later, he will be exhausted to death by Ling Tianyu. In my opinion, Lin Yi, this salted fish, can't turn over a new leaf. How dare he call himself the martial granduncle of the Blue Cloud sect in the North Island? This time, he was successfully challenged by someone who was a level higher than him, and he was the first one. "You've really lost all your face." Xue Jianfeng took the opportunity to ridicule. Xin Yijie frowned, but did not refute. At least from the current situation, Lin Yi was not in a good situation. As long as he could not get rid of the attack of 999 flying needles, he could only rely on his protective genuine qi to fight with Ling Tianyu. Moreover, every time Ling Tianyu consumed a little bit of his protective genuine qi, he would consume 10 or even 100 of his protective genuine qi. Bing Wuqing, on the other hand, was full of disapproval, but she did not show it on her face. After all, he had fought with Lin Yi before. Even he, a golden core late-stage expert, couldn't do anything to Lin Yi, let alone Ling Tianyu, who was only at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage. As for Ling Shan and the others, they were even less worried. Even if they could not see anything with their level, they had absolute confidence in Lin Yi. 1,000 flying needles were nothing. As time passed, Lin Yi was still trapped in the attack of 999 flying needles. The situation was as tense as before. This kind of battle of attrition was within everyone's expectations. However, what surprised them was that Lin Yi had been holding on until now without a scratch. What was even more ridiculous was that he seemed to be at ease, and did not seem to be at the end of his rope. This kid could really hold on. Xue Jianfeng furrowed his brows. Compared to Ling Tianyu, who was a potential formidable opponent, Xue Jianfeng's brows furrowed. Compared to Ling Tianyu, who was a potential rival, he was more inclined to humiliate Lin Yi. After all, there was a bloody feud between him and Lin Yi. He immediately said, "Uncle Xin, it's almost the time for 2 incense sticks to burn. Are we going to let them continue like this? It's completely meaningless. There should be a time limit, right? There is no time limit. There are only 2 results in all the battles of the trial competition. Either the winner is decided directly, or someone admits defeat. There is no third possibility." Xin Yijie glanced at him and curled his lips. "You're talking about a normal competition, but this is a cross-level challenge. We can't keep dragging on, can we? Are we going to let everyone wait like this? It's been 2 incense sticks time, anyone can tell who is stronger. Uncle Xin, are you being selfish and siding with the Green Cloud Sect's people from the North Island?" Xue Jianfeng said in a strange tone. "Oh, who is stronger and who is weaker? Why can't I see it? Why don't you, Xue Jianfeng, tell us?" Xin Yijie snorted. Of course. Xue Jianfeng was about to say that Lin Yi was obviously going to lose, but Lin Yi suddenly flashed and appeared in front of Ling Tianyu. Xue Jianfeng was speechless, and the others were also in an uproar. Lin Yi had been trapped for so long, and everyone thought that he was at his wit's end. Who would have thought that he would come out just like that? Was this guy teasing Ling Tianyu all the time? Everyone was dumbfounded, and Ling Tianyu, as the person involved, was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. The speed that Lin Yi showed before was frightening enough, but his speed was several times faster than before. It was hard to imagine such an amazing speed. But compared to this, there was something else that shocked Ling Tianyu even more. His 999 flying needles had surrounded Lin Yi tightly, with no openings or openings at all. How did Lin Yi get out unscathed? Before Ling Tianyu could make a further response, Lin Yi had lost the interest to continue playing with him. What greeted him was an unstoppable 1,000 legs of frenzy. After all, Lin Yi had almost tested Ling Tianyu's strength. Although Ling Tianyu had unlimited potential, he was still far from being able to make a name for himself. There was still a long way to go. Lin Yi's 1,000 legs of frenzy was extremely fast, and he appeared very abruptly, so it was even more difficult to guard against it. Even an expert in the early stage of gold core like Xin Yijie could not avoid it completely. However, Ling Tianyu took advantage of the situation and rolled on the ground, dodging the oncoming frenzy 1,000 kicks. Although he looked a little ragged, it was still enough to make Lin Yi look at him in a higher light. Even the people around him gasped in admiration. Chapter 5180. Stop. I admit defeat. Ling Tianyu shouted at the last moment. Only Lin Yi could retract his leg at this moment. If it was someone else, he would have kicked Ling Tianyu away. However, Lin Yi withdrew his leg effortlessly. He looked at Ling Tianyu meaningfully and thought to himself, this guy is really not easy to deal with. All geniuses were prideful. Even if a peerless genius like Ling Tianyu looked gentle and low-key on the surface, he was absolutely prideful in the bottom of his heart. This kind of person was usually very prideful. Even if they were forced into a desperate situation, it would be more difficult than ascending to the heavens to make them admit defeat. Unexpectedly, Ling Tianyu chose to admit defeat so decisively. Moreover, he was as calm as usual from the beginning to the end, without the slightest expression of shame or embarrassment. Just this temperament alone was already extremely remarkable. With extraordinary talent and profound shrewdness, even Lin Yi had to admit that Ling Tianyu would be a formidable figure in the future if he really grew up. Well, I hereby announce that Lin Yi wins, Xin Yijie announced on the spot. Everyone had not recovered from the shock until now. They were still immersed in the rhythm of the stalemate just now, but the winner was actually decided in the blink of an eye. This was too fucking sudden. Lin Yi looked indifferent. He turned around and was about to leave the arena. At this time, Ling Tianyu suddenly said behind him, "May I ask you a question?" "Speak." Lin Yi turned his head and looked at him. "How did you get rid of my flying needles just now?" Ling Tianyu asked. Logically speaking, his flying needles should have covered all 360 degrees without any blind spots, but Lin Yi was able to get out of it so easily, and he wasn't hurt at all. It was really confusing. In fact, he was not the only one who had this question. Everyone present also had this question. The only exception was Bing Wuqing. She was the only one who had seen Lin Yi's semi-primordial spirit state. Think about it yourself. Lin Yi smiled faintly. He was not stupid. The semi-primordial spirit state was his biggest trump card now. How could he reveal it to others so casually, especially in such a public place with so many eyes? All right, then I'll seek your guidance next time. Ling Tianyu didn't continue pestering him. There was still a faint smile on his face, and he didn't look like a loser who had just admitted defeat. Although he had indeed lost, it was just an insignificant match after all. He still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet. After all, there was no need to use it unless it was absolutely necessary. Compared to his life-saving trump card, what was the big deal about admitting defeat and surrendering? Xue Jianfeng was speechless when he saw this scene. For him, the ideal situation for Lin Yi to fight against Ling Tianyu was for both sides to suffer. But now, both of them were completely unscathed. Ling Tianyu, this brat, admitted defeat just like that. Instead, he acted as if they appreciated each other's talents. It was truly a pain in the ass. After both of them returned to their respective teams, Shin Ijie continued to ask in a loud voice, "Who else wants to challenge a higher level?" This time, no one made a sound. Even a supreme character like Ling Tianyu had lost. It could be seen how difficult it was to challenge someone of a higher level. This was tantamount to a heavy blow to their heads. They didn't dare to act rashly anymore. Challenging someone of a higher level was not a small matter. Not everyone would be as lenient as Lin Yi. What if they didn't have eyes and picked a ruthless person? What if the other party attacked ruthlessly or even killed you? There was no rule that no one could kill you in this competition. Of course, the silence was only temporary. There were many people who were ready to make a move. It was just that the rules had just been announced, and they hadn't found a suitable target to challenge yet. In another 2 days. When they were almost ready, those who had the strength and confidence to challenge someone of a higher level would really emerge. In that case, let's start drawing lots. Shin Ijie immediately arranged for each team to draw lots. Although it was a little complicated, there were less than 100 people in total. He could handle it all by himself. The first to start was the strongest team of Foundation Establishment Perfection. Including Lin Yi and Xue Jianfeng, there were only 8 people in total. They were all core disciples of various primordial sects, and they were all leading senior brothers. The duel between them almost represented the competition of the strongest disciples of their respective sects. It could be said to be full of gimmicks and naturally attracted attention. After the results of the drawing lots were out, Shin Ijie took a look and smiled. He shook his head and sighed. It's a pity that the entire Primordial Alliance wasn't mobilized for this trial in the secular world. Only the Central Island Alliance and the North Island Alliance were gathered. Otherwise, we could really make a ranking of the strongest disciples of the Primordial Alliance. The 8 people drew lots for 4 teams. Although Lin Yi had just fought a fierce battle with Ling Tianyu, he didn't receive any special treatment. Of course, he could also choose to forfeit, but then he would only have 4 chances left. He had to win 3 out of 4 to qualify for the trial. It should be known that it was pure bad luck to be picked by someone to challenge someone of a higher level than him. If he lost, he would be eliminated. Even if he won, there would be no benefit. Not to mention that his true chi would be wasted, he would also have to participate in the competition of the same level. It couldn't be helped. The rules were cruel. They didn't ask for fairness, only survival of the fittest. After all, the trial competition was to prepare for the primordial trials, and there was no such thing as fairness in the primordial trials. Let alone this kind of battle, there was no such thing as fairness in the primordial trials. Xue Jianfeng rubbed his palms together. He wanted to take this opportunity to teach Lin Yi a good lesson. Although he had absolute confidence in his strength as an early-stage gold core expert, since Lin Yi had just been exhausted by Ling Tianyu, it would be a waste not to take advantage of this situation and save some energy. Unfortunately, the result of the draw didn't go his way. In the end, Xue Jianfeng didn't encounter Lin Yi. Instead, he encountered the leading senior brother of another primordial sect. He couldn't help but curse his bad luck. Fortunately, he still had 4 chances. Every time they drew a new lot, it was theoretically very easy for them to draw the same opponent. If it was a coincidence, it was possible for them to draw the same opponent 5 times. This was one of the special rules of this trial tournament. Not only was it a test of raw strength, but it was also a test of everyone's ability to adapt and recover. Any weakness in this aspect could become a fatal flaw. Of course, if luck wasn't on his side, this sort of rule could very well cause Xue Jianfeng to miss out on Lin Yi in this competition, and Xue Jianfeng would have to save his revenge for the Primeval trials. Chapter 5181. At the same time, Xue Jianfeng's side was also like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. After all, he had the foundation of the first person in the Foundation Establishment realm. Even if he didn't reveal the strength of the early stage of Gold Core, it was still easy for him to deal with ordinary experts in the peak of Foundation Establishment realm. With the 2 of them as the foundation, all the 4 matches of the disciples in the peak of Foundation Establishment realm ended very quickly. The total time spent was only half an hour, much faster than Shin Ijie had expected. After the peak of Foundation Establishment realm, The next match was between the disciples in the late stage of Foundation Establishment realm. Among them, the one who received the most attention was naturally Ling Tianyu, who had just failed in his cross-level challenge. Although his strength was unparalleled among those at the same level as him, he had just consumed a lot of genuine qi on Lin Yi. More importantly, his moves and routines were seen clearly by others. It was enough time for him to come up with a countermeasure. With all these disadvantages added together, he was no longer a strong enemy to be avoided in the eyes of others, but a ready-made soft persimmon, which made the other disciples in the late stage of Foundation Establishment realm restless. If they could defeat Ling Tianyu today, it would not be as simple as a victory for them. More importantly, it would be enough to make them famous and gain both fame and fortune. The benefits were self-evident. However, it turned out that Ling Tianyu was Ling Tianyu after all. As the young head of the Thousand Blades sect, he was definitely not someone that ordinary people could mess with. His defeat to Lin Yi only highlighted Lin Yi's strength, but absolutely did not mean that he was weak. At least in front of these experts at the same level as him, Ling Tianyu was invincible. So what if his moves and routines were seen clearly by others? Putting aside the fact that his flying blades of Thousand Blades was not so easy to crack, he didn't even need to use it to deal with these experts at the same level as him. He could casually launch 100 blades of Thousand Blades, and no one could block it. Like Lin Yi and Shui Jianfeng, Ling Tianyu also easily finished the match in one move. In the face of his overwhelming strength, these disciples in the late stage of Foundation Establishment realm could only accept the fate of being crushed. As for becoming famous after one battle, they really thought too much. One match after another, the strength of the disciples decreased from high to low. Following that was the competition between disciples in the later stage of Foundation Building realm, the peak of the middle stage of Foundation Building realm, the middle stage of Foundation Building realm and the peak of the early stage of Foundation Building realm. Since Xin Yijie was the only judge and the space was limited, there could only be one duel at a time. Naturally, it would take a long time, but fortunately, the total number of people wasn't too high. As long as there were no accidents, the arrangement of one round every 2 days was already very lenient. Without Lin Yi, Shui Jianfeng, and Ling Tianyu, the rest of the duels were obviously much more boring. The only exception was a duel between Foundation Building realm cultivators in the later stages of the Foundation Building realm. That was because there was also a hot topic in this duel, Lung Lung. Thinking back, when she first came to the secular world, she was only in the early stage of Foundation establishment. Ever since she got to know Lin Yi, her strength had risen rapidly. After taking a stroll outside, she was already in the middle stage of Foundation establishment. Now, after a few months of hard cultivation on the Transfer Islands, her strength had skyrocketed to the late stage of Foundation establishment. She was even only a step away from the peak of the late stage of Foundation establishment. All in all, it had only been 10 months. She had advanced by leaps and bounds from the early stage of Foundation establishment to the late stage of Foundation establishment. Such a miracle might not be unparalleled in the ancient Jianghu, but it was definitely unprecedented. Moreover, Lung Lung wasn't someone without strength for nothing. Her crushed ice physique was 1 in a million. Once the advantage of it was truly developed, it would be no small matter. With Lung Lung's strength, it was naturally much easier for her to deal with an ordinary expert of the same level. It was just that she had yet to find a way to fully unleash the power of the crushed ice physique. Therefore, she wasn't as shocked as Lin Yi and the others. The whole process was without any surprises or danger. However, there was a little accident at the end. Lung Lung had a breakthrough on the spot. Although this was rare, it was not unheard of. During a duel, the state of one's essence, qi, and spirit would be elevated to the best. If one was already on the verge of a breakthrough, it wasn't strange for one to accidentally take advantage of the situation to break through. It was just that this would easily give the opponent an opportunity to take advantage of. That person had already been beaten up by Lung Lung to the point that he had no strength to fight back. If it wasn't for Lung Lung's mercy, he would have been beaten to the ground long ago. At this moment, when he saw an opportunity to fight back, he couldn't care less about etiquette and honor. He quickly waited for the opportunity to strike. Compared to being scolded for being shameless, it was more beneficial to get the victory in his hands. However, before he could make a move, he suddenly felt a chill on his back. An inexplicable vital energy actually entered his head in a single line. His entire person was instantly stunned. Until Lung Lung successfully broke through to the peak of the late stage of Foundation establishment, he didn't dare to move an inch. He muttered and doubted everything, looking as if he had lost his soul. Everyone thought that he was frightened by Lung Lung's crushed ice physique. Little did they know that Lin Yi was the mastermind behind all this. Just like that, Lung Lung took the first victory without any mishaps. At the same time, she also stepped into the threshold of the late stage of Foundation establishment. From the next round onwards, she would be competing with those late-stage Foundation establishment disciples on the same stage. If luck was on her side, her next opponent might be Ling Tianyu. Without further ado, when all the teams above the early stage of Foundation establishment had finished, an entire day had passed. Other than those disciples who were heavily injured and needed to rest quietly, the others had been waiting at the side the whole time. Although Xin Yijie didn't forbid them from moving freely, as long as it wasn't their turn to draw lots, they could totally go back and rest. However, no one was willing to give up this great opportunity to observe the other disciples. After all, they might be their future opponents. Only by knowing oneself and knowing the enemy could one gain the upper hand. Ling Shan and the others were observing as well, exchanging their opinions from time to time. Although they didn't have the intention to challenge those who were of a higher level than them, since the previous battles weren't against early-stage Foundation establishment disciples, they wouldn't be their opponents in the future. At first glance, it seemed like they were doing useless work, and they might as well rest and build up their strength like the other early-stage Foundation establishment disciples. However, to them, this day of observation was quite fruitful. In the past 3 days, they had already memorized what Lin Yi had taught them, and they had also practiced the counter moves that Lin Yi had come up with more than 100 times. However, that was just theory, after all. It was hard to say if it would actually be of any use. Chapter 5182. Finally, Xin Yijie announced loudly, "Next, we'll begin drawing lots for the Foundation establishment disciples. First match, Luo Shoshing of Snow Sword Sect against Ling Shan of the Common World." With that, Xue Jianfeng's eyes lit up. He didn't have much of a relationship with Luo Shoshing, but he was still a disciple of the Snow Sword Sect. This was a great opportunity. "Brother Luo, can I talk to you?" Xue Jianfeng hooked his finger at Luo Shoshing. Xue Jianfeng was no longer a cripple. With his strength and status, there was naturally no one in the Snow Sword School who would disobey him. Luo Shoshing was immediately overwhelmed by the favor. He immediately followed Xue Jianfeng and said with a fawning expression, "What instructions does senior brother Xue have for me? How confident are you against this Ling Shan?" Xue Jianfeng asked casually. 10. Luo Shoshing said confidently. He had already been an early-stage Foundation establishment expert for more than 10 years. Even though he had not broken through, that was only because he did not have any medicinal pills. Among all the early-stage Foundation establishment disciples in the Snow Sword School, he was one of the best. Right now, he was only facing a newcomer who had just broken through and had an unstable foundation. Furthermore, it was a woman from the secular world. If he could still lose, he could go eat shit. That's good. This battle concerns the face of our Snow Sword sect, and we can't lose, but... Xue Jianfeng looked at Ling Shan from head to toe, killing intent flashing in his eyes. Luo Shoshing followed his gaze and looked over. He rolled his eyes and said, "I know. Don't worry, senior brother Xue. I will stop when the time is right. I will not be ruthless." Ling Shan was, after all, a rare beauty, and he thought that Xue Jianfeng was eyeing her. "Wrong, I want you to do the exact opposite." Xue Jianfeng smiled coldly. He did think about Ling Shan before, and not just her, but the other beauties like Ziyu as well. If it weren't for Shahan and Cheng Yi staying in the common world, he'd even think about taking out Lin Yi's harem. But now wasn't the time to be obsessed with beauties. As long as he was strong enough, he could have as many beauties as he wanted. The most important thing right now was to attack Lin Yi. The exact opposite. What do you mean? Luo Shoshing was stunned. Very simple, I want you to kill her. Xue Jianfeng said in a deep voice. Kill? Xiaosheng jumped in fright. His name was Xiaosheng, and he'd killed quite a lot of people in the past, but facing a beauty like Lingshan, he really couldn't bring himself to do it. Plus, this was the tournament, and while killing wasn't prohibited, he wouldn't do it unless there was a huge grudge. That's right. In the future, as long as it's Lin Yi's people, I'll reward them handsomely for every one of them I kill. Otherwise, it means that they are not giving me face. Do as you see fit, Shui Jianfeng said with a cold snort. All right, senior brother Shui, just wait and see. At this point, Luo Shosheng didn't hesitate at all. He was an early phase disciple, and if he offended Shui Jianfeng, he wouldn't be able to survive in the Snow Sword School anymore. Plus, swords had no eyes, and even if he accidentally killed someone in the tournament, he wouldn't have to take any responsibility. Shui Jianfeng was whispering to Luo Shosheng, thinking that he had lowered his voice very much, but he didn't expect Lin Yi's senses to be far above his, a master at the early stage of Golden Core, and he could hear everything clearly. Lin Yi immediately reminded Lingshan, be careful later, that guy listened to Shui Jianfeng, and is ready to kill you. If you can't do it, just surrender. Don't risk it, safety first, understand? Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Lingshan nodded, and under the cheers of the crowd, she walked into the ring with a calm expression, looking quite like a general. Lin Yi nodded to himself. Lingshan had been training in the department for years, and while her strength hadn't improved much due to the limitations of the environment, her temperament had matured quite a bit. From a certain perspective, this kind of change was even better than the improvement of her strength. Xin Yijie gave the order, and the battle officially began. Lingshan didn't plan to attack first, since she was at an absolute disadvantage in terms of raw strength. Attacking first wouldn't give her the upper hand, and would instead expose an opening for the opponent to take advantage of. The best strategy for her was to defend and counterattack. Luo Shosheng smiled at the sight of Lingshan's posture. If that's the case, then I won't hold back. This blade of mine is called the Life Killer Blade, and when it's drawn, there will be blood. Good luck, miss. He was already looking down on Lingshan, and now he didn't care about her at all. He pulled his blade out of its sheath and slashed vertically. There didn't seem to be anything special about it at first glance, as if it was just a casual slash from someone underestimating their enemy. You don't even use the snow sword arts, and you think you can kill me just like that? Lingshan frowned and chose to dodge. If it wasn't for Lin Yi's warning, she would have attacked already. She didn't take the bait. Luo Shosheng also frowned. His strike was indeed ordinary. In the eyes of others, it was purely relying on brute force, without the slightest bit of subtlety. Little did they know that this was just a camouflage on the surface. Luo Shosheng looked like a big guy on the surface, but he was actually very shrewd. His attitude of underestimating his enemy was 30% real, but the other 70% was just for show. If Lingshan were to attack recklessly, she'd be falling right into his trap. His slash looked very crude, but it was actually a very dangerous move. With just a thought, he could turn it into one of the most dangerous moves of the Snow Sword School, the snow-killing form. Lingshan still didn't know that she'd just walked right in front of death's door. If she really did fall into Luo Shosheng's trap, she wouldn't be able to survive with her current strength, unless Lin Yi forcefully interfered. She'd lose if that happened. She was completely oblivious to all of this, only following Lin Yi's instructions. She held back for a full 10 moves, and was forced back by Luo Shosheng. She was in a dangerous situation, but fortunately, her early phase strength wasn't just for show. Even if she couldn't win against Luo Shosheng head-on, she could still hold on for a while if she focused on dodging. Heh, I don't know what kind of stupid move Lin Yi gave her, letting Luo Shosheng use the snow form so easily. Is there even a need to fight now? Shui Jianfeng mocked. Chapter 5183. This time, even Xin Yijie could only frown. He was a discerning man. He knew that the most dangerous thing when fighting with the disciples of the Snow Sword School was to be connected into the snow momentum by them. Therefore, he repeatedly told the disciples of the Blue Cloud sect in the North Island not to avoid the fight when fighting with the disciples of the Snow Sword School. Even if it was a little bit risky, they should try their best to get the first move. As long as they could make the opponents confused, the snow momentum would collapse by itself. It was a pity that he only said these words to the disciples of the Blue Cloud sect, and didn't dare to give Lingshan and the others pointers. Firstly, these people weren't real disciples of the Blue Cloud sect, and secondly, he had to give face to Lin Yi, his master. Not only would they not appreciate it, but they might even look down on him for no reason. But come to think of it, Xin Yijie was an experienced Golden Core practitioner from the Archaic Alliance. It wasn't surprising that he knew how to deal with the snow, but other people wouldn't know as much, especially people from the common world like Lingshan. She wouldn't know the inside story. The enemy was strong, and she was weak. Retreating as soon as the fight started, waiting for the enemy's momentum to pass before launching a counterattack. From Lingshan's point of view, this was quite a good strategy, but it was a pity that her opponent was Luo Shosheng of the Snowsword sect. There was a difference in strength between the two in the first place, and now that the snow had formed after 10 moves, the gap between them was even wider. Lingshan didn't have a chance to counterattack at all. She might have had a 10% chance of winning at the start, but now that the fight had dragged on, even that 10% chance of winning was gone. Why don't you just let her surrender, master? Where there's life, there's hope. Xin Yijie walked to Lin Yi's side and advised softly. Admitting defeat would only mean losing 1 round. There were still 4 chances left. As long as he worked hard, he might still have the chance to qualify for the trial. However, if he insisted on dragging it out, it wouldn't just be a matter of losing 1 round. He might even lose his life. Lin Yi smiled and shook his head. Don't underestimate Lingshan just because she's a weak girl. Her personality has always been strong. Unless she's willing, it's useless even if I say anything. This. Xin Yijie could only sigh helplessly and did not say anything else. After all, there were so many pairs of eyes staring at him. It was inappropriate for him to say too much under the watchful eyes of the public. Otherwise, he would be accused of favoritism. Xue Jianfeng smiled coldly as he looked at Lin Yi. In a battle between masters of the same level, Xue's force was unstoppable once it was formed. A casual move could easily kill someone, and it wouldn't leave any evidence behind. Just wait to collect this girl's corpse. As they were talking, the situation had changed. Lingshan was still able to barely dodge before, but now that Luo Shosheng was using his snow form, every move he made was unstoppable. She couldn't keep dodging anymore, and dodging wasn't a long-term plan. It was already a miracle that she was able to keep dodging for so long with her strength. Haha, still trying to dodge at this point. You think you can? Luo Shosheng laughed as he used the snow force to force 3 moves, forcing Lingshan into a corner. He couldn't wait to use his trump card, the snow kill stance. He was afraid that if he attacked too late, Lingshan would admit defeat and stop. He wouldn't be able to kill her then. As soon as he used the snow kill stance, a thick layer of invisible snow appeared on the blade, and the snow fell in all directions, covering Lingshan's entire body. Lingshan's movements slowed down by 60% in that instant. She was moving very fast before, but now it was as if she was moving in slow motion. The scene was very strange. The Snowsword School's snow force is really strong. The Archaic Alliance disciples couldn't help but gasp. Snow force was the signature of the Snowsword School, but it wasn't easy to form it in a real battle, especially at a lower level like Foundation Establishment. Normal disciples had a hard time grasping the intricacies of snow force, and unless they had an overwhelming advantage, they wouldn't be able to see the power of snow force with their own eyes. Yeah, they all say that snow force accumulates to become something extraordinary, but I didn't expect it to have such a strong restraining effect. No wonder they say that you can't form a snow force, and that you're invincible when you form it. There weren't many martial skills that had a restraining effect. Normally, it would at most slow down a person's speed by 10 to 20%. Restraining a person's speed by more than 30% was already rare. It had to be known that a 30% effect was already very obvious, but this time, it was a full 60%. In a situation like this, even a Sky-class full mastery would be able to defeat Lingshan easily, let alone Luo Shosheng who had the upper hand. The moment he used the snow kill stance, his slaughter blade was practically at Lingshan's neck. Lingshan was already a dead person in his eyes. Heh, too bad for such a beautiful girl. I wouldn't do something like this, but now that Xue Jianfeng wants you dead, You have no choice but to die. Luo Shisheng sighed to himself. He didn't show any mercy at all, going straight for Lingshan's neck. The people around him paled as they watched. That blade would definitely take Lingshan's head. This Luo Shisheng was really ruthless. Master, you're really not going to do anything? Even Xin Yijie, the leader of the team, couldn't help but feel his eyelids twitch. If it weren't for the fact that he had to remain neutral as a judge, even he would have stopped Lin Yi. No need. Lin Yi smiled faintly. Shui Jianfeng, who wasn't far away, frowned as he looked back and forth between Lin Yi and Lingshan. He couldn't help but pinch his chin in puzzlement. Was this guy really not worried about Lingshan's life at all, or was he just putting on an act? Just when Shui Jianfeng was puzzled, the situation on the field suddenly changed. Lingshan, who everyone thought was definitely going to die, suddenly sped up at the last moment, narrowly dodging the fatal blade. So fast. Luo Shisheng jumped in fright, and the people around him gasped as well. All of them were stunned by Lingshan's sudden burst of speed. Not good. Luo Shisheng fell for it. Shui Jianfeng was, after all, a Golden Core practitioner, and the Snowsword sect's senior disciple. Chapter 5184. Lin Yi's lips curled up. Lingshan's acting skills were quite good, fooling everyone in front of everyone. Even Shui Jianfeng, who was a bystander, could barely react, let alone Luo Shisheng, who was blinded by the whole situation. He was probably still in a daze right now. From the beginning to the end, this duel was a trap directed by Lin Yi and played by Lingshan. The Snow Sword School's most feared aspect was the Snow Force. Once the Snow Force was formed, it would be hard to block. Even Xin Yijie could easily see this, let alone Lin Yi, who had studied the Snow Sword School's practitioner's arts. Plus, he had Lung Lung beside him. Even if he missed it, Lung Lung would still remind him. After knowing this, the most common strategy was naturally what Xin Yijie had thought, to break the Snow Force, and try his best to avoid the Snow Force. However, from Lin Yi's point of view, such a strategy could only be considered as normal, and it was far from being smart. With the difference in strength between Lingshan and Luo Shisheng, how could she win if it was just normal? If Lingshan really went all out to break the Snow Force, she might be able to mess up Luo Shisheng's formation and make it hard for him to form the Snow Force, but that would definitely expose a lot of flaws. She was already at a disadvantage in terms of strength, and if she exposed more flaws, then there would be no way for her to fight. So, the strategy Lin Yi taught her this time was to show her weakness and let her opponent form the Snow Force, using this to magnify the underestimation hidden in her opponent's heart. When the opponent couldn't wait to release the Snow Force, it would mean that the opponent had underestimated her to the extreme, and that would be the perfect time to counterattack. Of course, it was far from enough to just rely on numbing her opponent's mentality. Lingshan had to purposely slow down her speed during this process, and that was why it was so difficult to dodge. Everything was just an act. As a result, Lingshan's speed was reduced by 30%, and when Luo Shisheng used his Snow Force, it was reduced by another 30%. That was why the slow-motion scene had happened. Luo Shisheng had underestimated his opponent, and didn't even realize that she was acting. He thought that Lingshan was weak, and that she wouldn't even be able to withstand a single blow from his snow aspect. That was why he used his snow aspect, determined to take her life. The Snow Slaughter form was an extremely dangerous move. It was extremely powerful, but at the same time, it would cause the user to reveal quite a few openings. As a result, unless there was a 90% chance of success, no disciple of the Snow Sword School would recklessly use this move. Even if they did use it, they would definitely be very careful, ready to withdraw and retreat at any time. Unfortunately, Luo Shisheng thought it was absolutely safe, so he had already thrown all of this to the back of his mind. Lingshan had been waiting for this opening from start to finish, and it had finally come. One retreating, one advancing, Lingshan relied on the sudden burst of speed she'd been hiding, dodging the killer's blade that was coming at her. She even went one step further, closing the distance between her and the man, not giving him a chance to react as she elbowed him in the throat. Luo Shisheng didn't even have the time to cry out in pain. The crowd was silent as they looked at the motionless Luo Shisheng on the ground. This turn of events was simply too sudden, and they didn't even have time to react. It wasn't until Xin Yijie announced Lingshan's victory that the crowd looked at each other, all of them looking at Lingshan in disbelief. She was actually able to turn the tables with one move from her opponent's snow aspect. This woman really wasn't simple. How was it? Did I hit well? Lingshan ran over to Lin Yi's side to take credit. It's SOSO. Lin Yi smiled. Lingshan's sis-in-law is SOSO even though she's so strong? Boss, your standards are too high. Chen Tian and the others couldn't help but gasp. It was true that Lingshan wasn't very strong in terms of strength, but the way she controlled the rhythm of the battle was far beyond a normal person's level. It was a classic example of the weak defeating the strong. Is it high? I don't think so. It's not like she's challenging someone of a higher level, it's just fighting someone of the same level. It's something that should be expected, wouldn't it? Wouldn't all that preparation be for nothing? Lin Yi chuckled. Lingshan's execution was indeed strong, but from his point of view, there were quite a few areas where she hadn't handled things perfectly. She was still too inexperienced. Wow, Lin Yi bro, you can't always use your own standards to judge us. Look at those people, their mouths are wide enough to fit a duck egg. You can see how strong Lingshan's sis was just now. Ziyu said with a frown. At least in the eyes of the outsiders, Lingshan's performance just now was absolutely stunning. Even Xin Yijie's eyes lit up. Luckily, Lingshan had just broken through and didn't have enough experience. Otherwise, with the strength she displayed just now, she might even be able to challenge someone of a higher level. Lin Yi waved his hand with a smile before turning to Lingshan. That battle was a very valuable experience for you, so don't get too excited yet. Sit down and think about it, reflect on what you did right and what you didn't. That's the only way you'll be able to improve and get stronger the more you fight. Okay. Don't worry, Lingshan nodded and went to meditate. While everyone was happy for Lingshan, Xue Jianfeng, on the other hand, was gritting his teeth in anger. As far as he was concerned, Luo Shosheng dealing with Lingshan should have been a piece of cake. He didn't expect things to turn out this way. He really didn't know what to say. Trash. Xue Jianfeng spat harshly at Luo Shaoxing, who was dragged out of the crowd. Then, he stared at Xin Yijie who was hosting the second round. It was a pity that he didn't get to kill Lingshan, but he still had a chance later on. He wasn't disappointed at all. As expected, the second round had Lin Yi's people. This time, it was Ying Ziyu. Xue Jianfeng was overjoyed. This girl looked much weaker than Lingshan, and even the weakest Foundation Establishment disciple in the Archaic Alliance would be taken care of easily. With his connections and reputation in the Archaic Alliance, any Foundation Establishment disciple wouldn't reject him if he gave them some benefits. Chapter 5185. Ziyu was a little nervous at first, but after realizing that it was Yu Bing, she was overjoyed. It became an internal sparring now, and it didn't matter who won or lost. In fact, Lin Yi had told them about this a long time ago. After all, they didn't have many people, and once they drew lots, it would be easy for them to fight amongst themselves. Under these circumstances, they had to go through the motions and distribute the wins to the person who needed it the most. Just like right now, Yu Bing chose to admit defeat after going through the motions. Although he had just reached foundation level as well, in terms of strength, Yu Bing was undoubtedly much stronger than Ziyu. With Lin Yi's special teaching, Yu Bing had enough confidence that he could get enough wins from the Archaic Alliance disciples. As long as his luck wasn't too bad, winning 3 out of 4 wasn't hard at all. Ziyu, on the other hand, was different. It wasn't easy for her to win from someone else, especially with Xue Jianfeng watching from the sidelines. It was even harder for her to get into the archaic trials, and so Yu Bing gave the win to her. Thanks, Yu Bing bro. Ziyu was all smiles after getting off the stage. She couldn't wait to get one of them every time. She didn't need many, just 2 more would do. That way, she'd be able to get into the archaic trials. Lin Yi and the others looked at each other and smiled. To be honest, they had the same thought as well. Even after all the preparation they had, they still didn't want Ziyu and the girls to take the risk. It was a pity that things like drawing lots could only be left to the heavens. Otherwise, Xin Yijie wouldn't be able to answer to the higher-ups if they did something, especially with so many people watching from the sidelines. I object. Xue Jianfeng shouted suddenly. Everyone instantly quietened down, and their gazes converged onto him in unison. They looked at each other and didn't understand what was going on. What are you objecting to? Shin Yijie frowned. I'm protesting that they're rigging the match. That Yu Bing was clearly going easy on Ziyu just now, just casually dealing with her and ending the fight. Even an idiot could see that. Are you going to say you can't see it, Uncle Shin? Shui Jianfeng hemphed coldly. Everyone turned to look at Shin Yijie. Shin Yijie nodded calmly and admitted, that's right. I can see it. Since you can see that they are faking it, you, as the martial uncle leading the team and the referee, actually don't care about it. Instead, you allow it. Martial Uncle Shin, aren't you being too biased by doing this? Are you looking down on our ancient alliance's rules too much? Shui Jianfeng took advantage of the situation and said overbearingly. However, Shin Yijie didn't panic at all. Instead, he looked at him with a faint smile and said, please forgive me for being ignorant. Why don't you tell me, Shui Jianfeng? Which rule in the Archaic Alliance states that one can't show mercy during a competition? This. Shui Jianfeng originally thought he had something on his opponent, but he was left speechless. If they were fighting against friends or family, then it was only natural for them to be lenient. The Archaic Alliance truly didn't have such a rule. This old man has always treated everyone equally. If you show mercy to others, or if you ask others to show mercy to you, then you'll have to pay the price. I won't stop it either. Any other questions? Shin Yijie said faintly. Shui Jianfeng hemphed coldly, speechless. He looked at Lin Yi's group hatefully, waiting for the lot drawing to begin. Lin Yi's group didn't participate in the next 2 matches, but in the 5th match, it was finally Wu Chuntian's turn. His opponent was Feng Pingxiu of the Righteous Sect. Shui Jianfeng wasn't familiar with Feng Pingxiu, but the Righteous Sect was also a small sect in the Zhongdao Alliance. They had a good relationship with the Snowsword sect, so Shui Jianfeng's words had some influence. Feng Pingxiu agreed to Shui Jianfeng's request without hesitation. However, what shocked everyone was that Feng Pingxiu, who was supposed to have the upper hand in terms of strength, was beaten up by Chuntian's series of quick attacks. From start to finish, he didn't even have a chance to fight back, and was forcefully taken down by Chuntian's series of attacks. This guy's so strong. Everyone was speechless. From the looks of it, they thought that Chuntian was much stronger than Feng Pingxiu, but they didn't know that it was all thanks to Lin Yi's teachings. The Righteous Sect's arts and techniques were all about advancing step by step, and this style was very stable. As long as one had the upper hand in terms of strength, they wouldn't be defeated under normal circumstances. But in Lin Yi's eyes, there was a huge drawback: it was too slow. Because of this, it was hard for the Righteous Sect disciples to use their full strength at the start, especially the first 3 moves. They could only use 70% of their strength, and under such circumstances, they wouldn't have much of an advantage. After all, if they could finish off their opponent in 3 moves, it wouldn't be a fight between the same level anymore. But Chuntian wasn't a normal opponent. He had the counter techniques that Lin Yi had taught him, and it was just right for him to take down Feng Pingxiu. It was like a father beating his son. After the first 3 moves, Feng Pingxiu was already showing signs of losing, and in his panic, he couldn't use his strength. It wasn't strange at all for him to be taken down by Chuntian. Trash. Trash. Shui Jianfeng gritted his teeth once more. Luo Shosheng might have been defeated by Ling Shan at the last moment, but at least it gave him hope. This Feng Pingxiu, on the other hand, was just a useless piece of trash. Fortunately, there was still a chance. That was the only thing Shui Jianfeng could do to comfort himself, but what hurt him the most was that Lin Yi's group either went up against their own people, or they got the last laugh like Ling Shan and Wu Chuntian. All the disciples of the ancient sects lost to them one by one, and a few of them were even turned around by Lin Yi as if they had the help of the gods. It was like seeing a ghost in the flesh. Of course, Lin Yi's group didn't win completely. Fatty Lai and Kang Xiaobo lost, but these two were very cunning. The moment they saw that the counter techniques Lin Yi taught them didn't work on their opponents, they didn't even bother fighting and just surrendered, not giving anyone a chance to do anything to them. When everyone was done fighting, Shui Jianfeng was so depressed that he wanted to spit out blood. He wanted to go up himself, but he was a foundation building perfected in name. Unless the people dared to challenge him, they wouldn't have the chance to do so. Chapter 5186. Shui Jianfeng couldn't help but feel a headache. This isn't right. I don't know what Lin Yi's group is up to, but they're all acting like they've taken the wrong medicine. Normal people really can't handle them. What should I do? He couldn't help but feel a headache. He'd promised the glasses doctor that he would be able to handle this. What if he messed things up and the glasses doctor cancelled his priority training right away? Just when Shui Jianfeng was at his wit's end, another disciple of the Snowsword School went up. Just like Luo Shosheng, he was forced into a snow form, and his opponent couldn't fight back at all. He was easily defeated in one move. This was the most normal result. If everyone was like Lingshan, turning defeat into victory in one move, then it would be a problem. At the thought, Shui Jianfeng had a flash of inspiration. He looked at Lin Yi and Cooled, who were chatting and laughing not far away. He understood immediately. The competition continued. After the early phase of Foundation was the battle between Sky Class Full Mastery. If one wasn't even at Sky Class Full Mastery, then they wouldn't have the right to participate in the competition. It would be a waste of time. There were only 2 short months left. If one was still at Sky Class Late Phase Peak or even lower, then there was no way they could succeed in the next 2 months. They were destined to be eliminated, and naturally, there was no need for them to participate in this competition. When the first round was over, it was already the second evening. Everyone went back to rest for the night, and after the third day, the second round of the competition would begin. According to the usual practice, the first round was to challenge someone of a higher level. The others had been watching the first round, and only Ling Tianyu had stepped up to challenge Lin Yi. He'd tasted defeat for the first time in his life. Now, in the second round, after 2 days of deliberation, and with the fact that the first round had shown everyone's strength, it was enough for everyone to use as a reference. Sure enough, there were a lot more people who chose to challenge those who were of a higher level than them. In total, there were as many as 7 people. Among them, the most eye-catching was Ling Tianyu. Although this young master of the Thousand Blades sect had been defeated by Lin Yi last time, there was no doubt about his strength. Apart from Lin Yi, no one else was a match for him. Facts had proven that even if Ling Tianyu was not the most invincible person in the Foundation establishment stage, he was definitely one of the best. The expert in the great circle of the Foundation establishment stage that he was fighting against was not weak, but he was easily killed in a single move without being able to fight back. Just like that, Ling Tianyu became the first disciple to qualify for the Prime Val trials, while the disciple in the great circle of Foundation establishment realm whom he defeated became the first unlucky guy to be eliminated. Looking at that person's dazed look, many people felt sad for a moment. A dignified disciple in the great circle of Foundation establishment realm was eliminated just like that. It really made people sigh and speechless. In terms of strength, this person was not weak among the experts in the great circle of Foundation establishment realm. If he had not encountered Ling Tianyu, he actually had a great chance to win 3 rounds against other experts of the same level. Of course, the premise was that his luck was not too bad. Unfortunately, there were no IFS in this world. His luck was not just bad, it was simply bad luck. Under such cruel rules, it was impossible for him not to be eliminated. Even if he wanted to blame someone, he could only blame himself for being targeted by Ling Tianyu. Brother Tianyu, as far as I know, you are not someone who easily admits defeat. Why didn't you continue to challenge Lin Yi today, but chose such a soft persimmon instead? Shui Jianfeng suddenly came over and asked with a strange and sarcastic smile on his face. As soon as his words came out, everyone around looked over. Even Xin Yijie couldn't help but listen attentively out of curiosity. For this reason, he even deliberately postponed the next cross-level battle. Ling Tianyu glanced around the crowd, and when his eyes swept past Lin Yi, he nodded slightly without any embarrassment. Then he said lightly, "Brother Shui, you are wrong. Tianyu respects every opponent. In Tianyu's eyes, Brother Zhon is a real opponent, not a soft persimmon." This Brother Zhon was Zhon Shixiang, the disciple in the great circle of Foundation establishment realm whom he had just defeated with one move. Although Ling Tianyu's expression was very sincere, everyone felt that it was just a formality. Zhang Shixiang was a strong opponent for others, but for a genius like Ling Tianyu, it was not an exaggeration to say that Zhang Shixiang was a soft persimmon. Even Zhang Shixiang himself thought so. Sure enough, he was a hypocrite. Xue Jianfeng cursed in his heart, but remained calm on the surface. He said with a faint smile, "Brother Tianyu seems to have not answered my question. Because I am no match for Brother Lin. It's as simple as that." Ling Tianyu didn't hide his answer at all. The outcome of the battle the day before yesterday had already been decided. At least for now, he wasn't Lin Yi's opponent. Even if he had the pride of being the young master of the Thousand Blades sect, he wouldn't lie to himself about this kind of thing. "Really? Then why don't you challenge me? I have been waiting for you for a long time." Xue Jianfeng's words surprised everyone. Everyone immediately looked at each other. Xue Jianfeng and Ling Tianyu were both like kings in the Foundation establishment realm. Unfortunately, they had never had the opportunity to fight each other head-on. Therefore, the strength of the two had always been one of the hottest topics in the market. However, Ling Tianyu did not choose Xue Jianfeng for 2 cross-level challenges in a row, which made everyone very disappointed. Unexpectedly, Xue Jianfeng actually provoked him in public at this time. Did he want to fight with Ling Tianyu? Is it necessary? Ling Tianyu glanced at him with a faint smile. Everyone couldn't help but burst into an uproar. Ling Tianyu's answer seemed to be casual and ordinary, but there was indescribable self-confidence and contempt in it. It seemed that in his eyes, Xue Jianfeng was not an existence on the same level as him, and there was no need to deliberately defeat him. Ha 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 ha. Xue Jianfeng looked up to the sky and laughed until he was out of breath. After a long while, he suddenly said, "That's right, there is indeed no need." As he said this, he had already officially added Ling Tianyu's name to his must-kill list. Although the 1,000 blades flying together was a little tricky, Ling Tianyu was still an expert at the peak of the late stage of Foundation Establishment realm, while he was at the early stage of Gold Core realm. It was obvious who was stronger and who was weaker. Ling Tianyu smiled indifferently and didn't continue to pay attention to him. He also didn't have any interest in watching other people's battles, so he chose to turn around and leave. Chapter 5187. This was the cruelty of challenging someone of a higher level. It was extremely difficult and dangerous. With Zhang Shixiang as an example, everyone who was challenged would definitely go all out. Whenever there was a chance, they would strike ruthlessly to establish their might, killing the chicken to warn the monkey. Only in this way could others fear them and stay far away, no longer daring to challenge them of a higher level. When the 7 cross-level duels were over, Xin Yijie was about to announce the start of the second round of regular duels. At this moment, Xue Jianfeng stood up and said loudly, "I'm sorry, Junior Uncle Xin. There's something that I have to tell everyone. Otherwise, some people will play us in the palm of their hands with dirty and despicable means. They think that no one knows about it." "What are you trying to say?" Xin Yijie humphed coldly, trying his best to control his temper. His impression of Xue Jianfeng was extremely bad. If it wasn't for everyone's eyes, he wouldn't be so polite. "What I'm trying to say is that our Snow Sword School sent out a traitor, and because of this traitor, our Snow Sword School's disciples lost a battle that they shouldn't have lost." Xue Jianfeng pointed at one person. It was Leng Leng. Leng Leng suddenly became the center of attention. She didn't know what to do. Fortunately, Lin Yi was standing next to her. One look from him calmed her down and she retorted, "First, I'm not a traitor. The Snow Sword School never announced that I'm a traitor. Second, I don't know what you're talking about. What does the Snow Sword School's disciple losing the battle have to do with me?" Xue Jianfeng laughed coldly and pointed at Luo Shosheng. "All right, then why don't you tell everyone, with Luo Shosheng's strength, how could he be defeated by Lingshan in one move when he had already formed a snow form? Of course it's because Lingshan had a better grasp of the rhythm, and Luo Shosheng underestimated his opponent. What's so strange about losing the battle?" Leng Leng said disapprovingly. "That's right, everyone can see that. It's a perfect example of the weak defeating the strong. There's nothing to doubt," Xin Yijie added. "I don't think so. Lingshan's grasp of the rhythm was ingenious, and Luo Shosheng did underestimate his opponent. But if it's just based on these 2 points, she would at most be able to find a flaw in his counterattack. Why don't you guys put yourselves in her shoes and think about it? If you guys had the opportunity to counterattack, would you be able to turn defeat into victory in one move? Xue Jianfeng asked. Everyone paused for a moment, shaking their heads in unison. Luo Shosheng had used his snow force, and that powerful restriction effect was real. Even if he revealed an opening, it would still be extremely hard to defeat him in one move. After all, Lingshan was just a newbie in the common world who'd just reached foundation level. Xin Yijie frowned. Although he didn't want to agree, what Xue Jianfeng said did make some sense. Recalling the scene of Lingshan turning the tables, even he felt that it was a little unbelievable. So, I think it's necessary to ask again. Why was Lingshan able to defeat Luo Shosheng in one move under that situation? Xue Jianfeng didn't need Lung Lung's answer, because he had his own. He pointed at Lung Lung and said, "There's only one reason. We, Xue Jian, sent out a traitor. A traitor who revealed our sect's arts to the enemy." Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. Xue Jianfeng was really shameless. He had already become a lackey of the center, but he could still say that Lung Lung was a traitor in public. What a weirdo. What proof do you have? Xin Yijie said in a low voice. At this point, he had to continue the conversation. Otherwise, it would be his dereliction of duty as the leader of the team. However, it was impossible for him to follow Xue Jianfeng's wishes. Unless Xue Jianfeng could present solid evidence, otherwise, it would just be a groundless speculation. Lingshan's attack that turned the tables just so happened to hit the life gate of snow murder form. Because of that, she was able to kill Luo Shosheng in one move. It can't be a coincidence, can it? Xue Jianfeng smiled coldly. Every sect had different mental cultivation methods, and the way to circulate their Zhenqi was also different. Every move and every style had a completely different emphasis, so the vital point of every move was very different. For example, when using the snow-killing style, when using this move, the throat was the most crucial point of the vital point of the Zhenqi circulation. As long as the throat was hit, even if the opponent was weak, it would be easy to defeat the opponent in one move. Xin Yijie could only look at Lin Yi, hoping that Lin Yi could stand out and refute it himself. After all, what Xue Jianfeng said did make sense. It would be too far-fetched to say that Lingshan's last move that went straight for Luo Shosheng's throat was a coincidence. You have nothing to say now, right? If it wasn't for Lung Lung, if it wasn't for the traitor, if it wasn't for her revealing our sect's arts and the life gate of Snow Sword School, how could Lingshan win against Luo Shosheng with her insignificant strength? So now, the evidence is irrefutable. Lung Lung is the traitor, and Lingshan relied on her to turn the tables. Xue Jianfeng struck the iron while it was hot and made the final decision. This time, everyone's gazes towards Lung Lung and Lingshan turned unfriendly. Although this matter didn't seem to have anything to do with them, it affected the fairness of the competition. If Xin Yijie still wanted to cover up for them, he'd be the target of everyone's wrath. Hold on. Lingshan's technique is indeed a perfect counter to your Snow Sword School. However, aren't you being a little too unscrupulous if you're trying to blame Lung Lung with just a few one-sided and arbitrary words? Or is it that Xue Jianfeng, your IQ is so low that you can't think of any other possibilities? Lin Yi smiled calmly. What did you say? Xue Jianfeng froze and raged. The evidence is irrefutable, and you're still trying to deny it. You still have the cheek to say that the evidence is irrefutable? Lin Yi snorted and said calmly, if that's the case, then I'd like to ask for your advice. Yesterday, during the early phase of foundation building, it wasn't just your Snow Sword School that was countered. The other righteous sects and whatnot were also countered by us. How are you going to explain this? You're not going to say that all the Primeval sects have traitors and revealed their arts to us beforehand, are you? Chapter 5188. After a while, Xue Jianfeng tried his best to explain, that's different. The other sects are only suppressing it on the surface. Even if they don't know the practitioner's arts and the style's Mingmen, it's not hard as long as they use the right strategy. But Luo Shosheng is different. His style's Mingmen has been locked on, so there's no doubt about it. Is that so? Then according to what you're saying, As long as we can lock on the style's Mingmen, it must be someone who snitched on us? Lin Yi smiled faintly. Of course, if it's not someone snitching on us, do you think it's just luck? Shui Jianfeng hemped coldly. Lin Yi glanced at the other people's expressions. Seeing that they were still skeptical, he said, then what if I can lock on the opponent's Mingmen with ease later? What do you say? How is that possible? Shui Jianfeng snorted disdainfully. Even if Lin Yi's strength was much higher than his opponent's, the most he could do was win with brute force. It was impossible for him to lock onto his opponent's moves, unless he knew his opponent's arts and all their moves like the back of his hand. Plus, the drawing hadn't even started yet. They didn't even know who their opponent was. Lin Yi's words were bullshit to Shui Jianfeng. Alright, then open your eyes wide and watch. We'll talk after you're done, Lin Yi smiled faintly. Alright. But let me say this first. If you can't lock on the opponent's Mingmen later, it'll be a confession. I suggest disqualifying Leng Leng and Ling Shan. Uncle Xin, that's not too much, is it? Shui Jianfeng said immediately. Xin Yijie and Lin Yi looked at each other. Seeing how calm Lin Yi was, he nodded in front of the crowd. After all, if Leng Leng revealed the Snow Sword School's practitioners' arts to others, it would be too bad of an influence. They could only be disqualified as a warning to others. Alright, let's start then, Lin Yi said casually. Alright. Xin Yijie immediately began to preside over the drawing of lots for the Foundation Establishment Great Perfection disciples. Including Lin Yi and Shui Jianfeng, there were originally 8 Foundation Establishment Great Perfection disciples. However, because of Ling Tianyou's successful cross-level challenge and Zhon Shixiang's early elimination, there were only 7 left. This wasn't easy to arrange, but it wasn't completely unsolvable. They just had to draw the missing disciples and make them priority for the next round. If they didn't get enough matches because of this, they could just make up for it in the future. The results came out very quickly, and Lin Yi's opponent this time was the only female of the entire group of perfected foundations, Duan Muyu, the senior sister leading the group from Leafling. Although she was a girl, Duan Muyu's every move was valiant and quite masculine. Both her dressing and temperament were very masculine. She was a maverick woman. The corner of Shui Jianfeng's lips curled up when he saw this. Lin Yi had sworn that he could easily lock onto any opponent's Mingmen, but this Yi Ling sect was one of the most mysterious sects in the Archaic Alliance. Their movements were like ghosts, and their moves were extraordinary. Even Shui Jianfeng didn't know much about them. He couldn't even name their moves, let alone Mingmen. Lin Yi's bet was a lost one, given that he'd picked an opponent like this. Please. Lin Yi walked into the field slowly and made a gesture to Duan Muyu. Duan Muyu nodded slightly and didn't say anything. She moved her feet and dashed towards Lin Yi. Her movement was very strange. Like a falling leaf in the wind, she drifted from left to right, but her speed wasn't slow at all. In the blink of an eye, she was in front of Lin Yi. Duan Muyu's movement is quite the essence of Yi Ling sect. Although she's not as amazing as Ling Tianyu, she's a rare outstanding figure among the disciples of the same generation in the Archaic Alliance. Xin Yijie couldn't help but sigh. Although Foundation Establishment disciples weren't the decisive power of the Archaic Alliance, they still represented the future of each sect. A strong Foundation Establishment disciple meant that the sect had a strong foundation and a bright future. On the other hand, if the Foundation Establishment disciples weren't strong enough, then the future of the sect would be bleak. In the entire Archaic Underworld, the Thousand Blades sect had the amazing Ling Tianyu, the Snow Sword sect had the powerful Shui Jianfeng, and even Yi Ling sect had the outstanding Duan Muyu. They were all the reserve forces of the Middle Island Alliance. On the contrary, the North Island Alliance was mediocre. It had been a long time since they had such a talented disciple. At this rate, after 100 years, when these people grew up one by one, it would be difficult for the North Island Alliance to maintain its status as an equal with the Middle Island Alliance. Xin Yijie was worried, but the situation on the field had changed in an instant. Duan Muyu's movement was unpredictable, and her opponent in the last round had suffered from it. But this time, her opponent was Lin Yi. After years of continuous improvement, the butterfly microstep's unpredictable movement was not inferior to Yi Ling's movement at all. In terms of speed, Duanmuyu's movement was far faster than hers. Duanmuyu originally wanted to seize the initiative with Yi Ling's movement, but before she could lock on to Lin Yi suddenly blocked the position behind her. The difference in movement was obvious. The eyes of the spectators brightened. As expected of a powerful figure who could suppress Ling Tianyu to the point of being helpless. Duanmuyu's strength was not weak, but it was not enough in front of Lin Yi. However, Xue Jianfeng still had a calm and confident smile on his face. Of course, he knew that Lin Yi was much stronger than Duanmuyu, but so what? The bet between him and Lin Yi was not about who would win or lose, but whether Lin Yi could lock on to Duanmuyu's movement. This was more than 1,000 times more difficult than winning or losing. Unless Lin Yi knew the mental cultivation method and movement of Yi Ling sect like the back of his hand, it was as difficult as ascending to heaven to achieve this. You are really strong, but it won't be so easy to defeat me. Duanmuyu glanced at Lin Yi, who was behind her. She knew that Yi Ling wouldn't be able to shake him off. Moreover, her chances of winning weren't high in the first place. If she kept dodging, she wouldn't stand a chance at all. As soon as she finished speaking, Duanmuyu opened her palm, and a withered leaf slowly fell. Chapter 5189. One falling leaf tells the world of autumn. Yi Ling sect's moves are always so unpredictable, Xin Yijie said. Xin Yijie sighed. This move, falling leaves in autumn, could be considered as one of the few representative moves of the Yi Ling sect. It was not because it was the most powerful move, but it was simply because it was the most well-known move. Everyone nodded in agreement. Although Leaf Spirit sect was not the strongest primordial sect, it was definitely one of the most unfathomable primordial sects. Furthermore, it had firmly occupied the position of one of the 10 minor primordial sects and clans since a long time ago. Its strength was not to be underestimated. It was just that Leaf Spirit sect kept a low profile, giving off a feeling that it was not as eye-catching as Snowsword sect. She can actually hide herself with just the intent alone, with no flaws at all. This Duanmuyu is so strong. Ziyu's eyes lit up. The others felt the same. Lin Yi had explained the arts and moves of Yi Ling sect to them before, but they didn't understand at all. After all, Yi Ling sect was too different from the other sects. Their moves were all about intent, and unless they could experience it themselves, they wouldn't be able to understand it no matter how much Lin Yi taught them. But now that they saw it with their own eyes, they had a direct understanding of the so-called intent of Yi Ling sect. At the same time, they couldn't help but feel lucky that they didn't meet any Yi Ling disciples in the first round, or they wouldn't be able to use the counter moves that Lin Yi taught them. Actually, this wasn't strange at all. The Leaf Spirit sect was unfathomable. Due to the extremely unique aptitude requirements, there weren't many disciples in the sect. There were only 4 disciples participating in the secular world this time, and only one of them was at the early stage of foundation establishment. The chances of them drawing lots to meet each other weren't high. Yeah, her Yi Ling technique is already strong enough, and with this move, it's perfect. We can't even see where she is with the naked eye, let alone fight back, Lingshan frowned. Luckily, her opponent is Lin Yi boss. If it were us, we'd just be sitting ducks, Chen Tian said happily. Hehe, you guys are thinking too much. Duanmuyu is a perfected foundation establishment expert. What does that have to do with us? The ones we've met are at most early stage of foundation establishment realm. Even if they're Yi Ling disciples, they wouldn't be able to practice Leaves Knows the Autumn to this degree, would they? Yu Bing couldn't help but laugh. You're right. Everyone looked at each other and smiled. While everyone was talking, Duanmuyu, who had concealed herself with the help of the falling leaves of autumn, was finally about to make a move. After all, this wasn't an invisibility technique. Once her opponent had completely adapted to this state, he would naturally be able to easily discover her traces. She had to finish the battle before that happened. Otherwise, all her efforts would be in vain. However, before she could really make a move, Lin Yi suddenly chopped diagonally in front of him without warning. At the same time, he said indifferently, "Let's stop here." Everyone outside the arena was baffled. After a moment, they came to a realization and were all amazed. It turned out that Duanmu Yu had never left from the beginning to the end. She had indeed used the falling leaves of autumn to become one with her surroundings, but she did not make any unnecessary movements at all. She just stayed quietly in place, waiting for the best opportunity to attack. One had to admit that this was a very smart choice. It was better to stay put than to move. This way, not only could she minimize her flaws, but she could also use Leaves Knows the Autumn's state to make her opponent even more confused. After discovering that she had disappeared, a normal person's first reaction wouldn't be to think that she was still in the same place. They would subconsciously exclude this option. Unfortunately, her opponent was Lin Yi. Even if Leaves Knows the Autumn state could fool everyone present, it couldn't fool Lin Yi's consciousness, which was far above theirs. Duan Muyu was startled on the spot. She couldn't help but smile bitterly and helplessly say, as expected of someone who can defeat Ling Tianyu, "I lost." This result was far beyond everyone's expectations. They all thought that even if Lin Yi could win, he would at least have to go through a fierce battle like the day before yesterday against Ling Tianyu. They didn't expect that it would end so quickly. The two of them hadn't even exchanged any physical blows before the duel was over. Lin Yi nodded and turned to Xue Jianfeng. "What else do you have to say now? What do you have to say? Is there something wrong with your brain? You only won against Duan Muyu, and you didn't lock on to her move Mingmen. How dare you be so proud in front of me?" Xue Jianfeng sneered. "Is that so?" Lin Yi asked with a smile that didn't seem like a smile. Even now, one of his hands was still in a knife-hand position, pointing precisely at Duan Muyu's waist. "You're wrong. Although I'm very curious how he knew, what he pointed at was indeed my move Mingmen," Duan Muyu suddenly said. If Lin Yi hadn't pointed at her move Mingmen, she wouldn't have admitted defeat on the spot. At the very least, she would have fought for a while longer. Lin Yi was a little surprised to hear this. Although the move Mingmen was not a core secret, it was still a very secretive thing for each sect. Otherwise, if it was made known to everyone, it would be very easy for outsiders to counter it. Of course, the move Mingmen had always been the most important thing that everyone focused on protecting. Even if one knew where it was very difficult to attack it. It was just like knowing which parts of a person's body were fatal. You couldn't hit them wherever you wanted. You had to have the strength to do so first. "What did you say?" Xue Jianfeng's expression immediately froze. He didn't expect Duan Muyu to admit it in public. He hurriedly said, "Duan Muyu, did you receive a bribe from him? That's why you're deliberately putting on a show in front of us." Everyone looked at each other. Although such suspicion was a little biased, Duan Muyu had indeed admitted it a little too straightforwardly. No wonder people speculated that it was a conspiracy. The move Mingmen isn't a secret that no one knows about. As long as it's someone in the upper echelons of the Archaic Alliance with some qualifications, I believe it shouldn't be difficult for them to know. Moreover, when has my Yi Ling sect ever done things so vile? Duan Muyu said indifferently. Chapter 5190. Humph. One's position determines one's position. Lin Yi is also a member of your Blue Cloud sect. Uncle Master Xin must be biased, so your words may not be trustworthy, Xue Jianfeng argued. Preposterous. How dare you doubt me? Xin Yijie was furious. Xue Jianfeng was obviously provoking him. If it weren't for his identity as the leading Uncle Master, he would have taught him a lesson. At this time, Bing Wuqing suddenly said, "I've also heard that the weakness of the falling leaves is indeed at the waist. Fuck." Xue Jianfeng almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He could twist words and force logic on Xin Yijie, but he couldn't possibly insist that Bing Wuqing's words were untrustworthy. After all, Bing Wuqing was on his side. Looking at Bing Wuqing's expressionless face, Xue Jianfeng wanted nothing more than to fall out with her on the spot. It was a pity that he did not have the strength nor the confidence to do so. After all, in terms of status, Bing Wuqing was above him in both the Snowsword faction and the center. So, he could only shut his mouth resentfully. "Now you have nothing to say, right?" Lin Yi smiled faintly. Xue Jianfeng was speechless for a while. Since things had come to this, it was useless to say anything else. He could only snort to show his silent agreement. "Hey, when are you going to put your hand down?" Duan Muyu suddenly snorted. Only then did Lin Yi realize that his hand was still on Duanmuyu's waist. She might have the aura of a man, but she was still a girl, and a pretty one at that. He quickly pulled his hand back and smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry." Other girls would be shy in this situation, but Duanmuyu didn't seem to care at all. Instead, she asked curiously, "How do you know the weakness of the falling leaves?" It wasn't strange that Lin Yi and the others knew the weakness of the Snowsword sect. After all, there was Lung Lung. But now, even the Leaf Spirit sect knew it like the back of his hand. This was a little unbelievable. After all, Lin Yi was from the secular world. It's not strange. He's the granduncle of our Green Cloud sect in the North Island. It's normal for him to know about the situation of all the primordial sects. Shin Ijie explained. Really? Duanmuyu looked at Lin Yi doubtfully and did not say anything more. After this small disturbance, the grand competition continued. Xue Jianfeng, who had just been given the cold shoulder by Lin Yi, immediately displayed his prowess in the competition, beating his opponent to the brink of death with a single move. Clearly, he was using his opponent as a punching bag. Thus, one more Great Perfection Heaven rank disciple was seriously injured and eliminated, leaving only 6 people. But this was within expectations. As the competition progressed, this kind of situation would only increase. Soon, after the Great Perfection Foundation Establishment Realm disciples, it was the Peak Late Foundation Establishment Realm disciples. Although the most interesting representative, Ling Tianyu, had obtained the trial qualification in advance, there were still many highlights in this group. Among them, the most eye-catching was Lung Lung, who made a breakthrough in the middle of the last round. Coincidentally, Leng Lung's opponent this time was Lai Yingzhu, a disciple of the Green Cloud sect in the North Island. Although he was not the leading senior brother because of Shin Ijie, he was the strongest among all the Green Cloud sect disciples in the North Island. Looking at Lai Yingzhu, who stood opposite of Lung Leng, Shin Ijie could not help but shake his head. Even if the leading senior brother was not a genius disciple, most of them were Great Perfection Foundation Establishment Realm experts. Unlike the one from the Green Cloud sect in the North Island, he looked ordinary and inconspicuous even in the Peak Late Foundation Establishment Realm group. How embarrassing. I hope this guy won't embarrass the Green Cloud sect in the North Island. Shin Ijie secretly smiled bitterly. Although Lai Yingzhu won the last round, he only won by a narrow margin against an opponent whose strength was at the bottom. The result was really unsatisfactory. He was the number 1 disciple of the Green Cloud sect in the North Island. If he could not win 3 rounds in the end and was eliminated, it would be really embarrassing. Even Shin Ijie, the leading senior brother, would feel ashamed. Especially now, even though it was only the 2nd round, his opponent was cooled, who had just broken through to the next level. Her strength was still far from being consolidated. Logically speaking, he should be able to take her down easily. If he still lost, not only would he be a laughingstock, his future would also be worrying. Please. Lai Yingzhu's expression was very dignified. In the eyes of others, this was just an ordinary duel. The most special thing was Lung Lung. Very few people could feel the huge pressure on him. Even Shin Ijie was only worried that he would bring shame to the sect. Only he himself knew the feeling of great pressure. To him, this was a battle that concerned his future, and it was an important battle that he absolutely could not lose. Please. Lung Lung was slightly stunned. Although the trial competition was related to the qualification for the Archean trial, it was not a particularly important competition in essence. Generally, it was enough to deal with it normally. It was rare to see someone like Lai Yingzhu who was so serious. However, Lai Yingzhu's attitude also gave her a lot of pressure. After all, she had just made a breakthrough. She had not fully adapted to the strength of the peak of the late stage of Foundation Establishment Realm, let alone consolidating her strength. Now that she was facing Lai Yingzhu, strictly speaking, she was the one who was at a disadvantage. Affected by the two of them, the atmosphere of the audience began to become dignified. Everyone's voice gradually became lower, and their eyes were all focused on Lung Leng and Lai Yingzhu. They all secretly guessed at the same time, who will make the first move. It was reasonable to say that in this kind of competition, the stronger side would usually make the first move and seize the initiative. However, Li Yingzu's posture was as if he was facing a great enemy. For the first time, he took the initiative to take a defensive posture, which really made people's eyes pop out. Isn't this guy a little too cautious? Everyone could not help but look at each other. Just when they were stunned, Lung Lung moved and took the initiative to attack. The weapons of the Archean Snow Sword sect's disciples were generally swords. Some would also choose weapons such as knives and spears. However, Lung Lung was an exception. So far, she had not specially practiced any weapons. Her only fighting method was close combat. Chapter 5191. Especially before she came out to the secular world, she was only at the early stage of foundation building. It was normal to not use a weapon at this level. There were many disciples who would start to practice a certain weapon when they reached the middle stage of foundation building. However, no one would have thought that in just 10 months, Lung Lung could rise all the way to the peak of the late stage of foundation building. Even her master would be shocked if he heard about this. So, Lung Lung became a complete anomaly in the immemorial Snowsword sect. She was a master at the peak of the late stage of foundation building, but she didn't even have a weapon and could only rely on her fists and feet to fight. But even so, Li Yingzu didn't dare to take it lightly. Instead, he was very nervous, afraid that Lin Yi would teach Lung Lung some special moves to counter his Green Cloud sect. After all, there were so many examples before, he couldn't help but worry. What he didn't know was that Lin Yi only taught Lingshan and the others the counter moves. As for Lung Lung, she didn't do any homework in this aspect. The reason was simple, she didn't need it. The reason why Lin Yi spent so much effort to study the counter moves of each sect was purely because Lingshan and the others had just built their foundation not long ago. Their strength was too low. If they didn't use this method, it would be difficult for Lingshan and the others to qualify for the trial. But Lung Lung was different. With her talent and strength, it was not difficult for her to win 3 rounds. What Lung Lung needed the most at this stage was actual combat experience. If she used this kind of trick, she could win more easily, but it would be putting the cart before the horse. Lin Yi naturally wouldn't let her do such a stupid thing. In the blink of an eye, Lung Lung had already swept her leg. Li Yingzu hurriedly dodged back subconsciously, but then he realized that the opponent was a disciple of the Snowsword sect. If he dodged, wouldn't it be letting her become snow? Although there was a precedent like Lingshan, Li Yingzu didn't have the confidence to copy Lingshan's strategy. After all, if he didn't go through special practice, this strategy would not only be ineffective, but it would be easy to get himself into trouble if he wasn't careful. Moreover, Lung Lung and Lingshan were on the same side, so they must have been prepared. Li Yingzu reacted and immediately began to counterattack. In any case, he absolutely couldn't let Lung Lung Lian Shui continue. Otherwise, it would bode ill rather than well. Man! Xin Yijie sighed helplessly as he looked at the scene. His response was obviously different from before. Although Li Yingzu was a peak late phase of foundation building, and was much stronger than Lingshan and the others, but in terms of battle experience and potential, he couldn't even compete with Lingshan and the others, let alone Lung Lung, who was extremely talented. Li Yingzu's sudden attack was not out of Lung Lung's expectation. This time, it was Lung Lung's turn to retreat. However, she was prepared to advance by retreating. Li Yingzu couldn't even touch a strand of her hair in 3 consecutive moves. As a result, he was flustered and revealed a slight flaw. Lung Lung seized the opportunity and immediately whipped her leg. Bang! Li Yingzu hurriedly used the long stick in front of his body to block. Finally, he was barely able to block the strength of Lung Lung's whipping kick. Unfortunately, his chest was still scratched. Even if it was just a light scratch, it was enough for Lung Lung. Don't forget that she had the shattered ice physique. The restrictive effect of the snow style was very obvious. It was enough to reduce the speed of a person by more than 30%. However, compared to the unique talent of the shattered ice physique, it was nothing. Even though Lung Lung was far from truly developing the power of the shattered ice physique, after being scratched by her kick, Li Yingzu suddenly felt cold all over his body. He was caught off guard and his speed was suddenly reduced by a lot. It's over. Xin Yijie shook his head speechlessly. He clearly knew that Lung Lung had the shattered ice physique, But Liangzu still let his opponent touch his body so easily. At the crucial moment, he even forgot to protect his body. How could he win like this? Facing an opponent like Lung Lung, no matter what kind of countermeasure was adopted, it was the basic common sense to maintain the protective true qi at all times. Because only in this way could he avoid the direct attack on his body and minimize the restrictive effect of the shattered ice physique. Otherwise, there was no way to fight at all. As expected, after Lung Lung's one move succeeded, she immediately launched a series of unceremonious attacks. Liangzu's speed was greatly restricted. Even if he wanted to escape, he couldn't. He could only brace himself to deal with her. However, in this case, how could he resist Lung Lung, who was getting more and more powerful? The situation suddenly turned for the worse. Everyone was shocked. Liangzu was supposed to have the upper hand in this battle. At the very least, they should be evenly matched. However, they didn't expect the situation to become like this all of a sudden. If it went on like this, it was only a matter of time before Lung Lung won this battle. Hehe, the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island is really full of talents. I admire you. Xue Jianfeng sneered. Of course, he didn't want to see Lung Lung in the limelight. However, he also disliked Xin Yijie and the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island. It was not a bad thing to take this opportunity to ridicule them. Xin Yijie snorted and didn't answer. It was not that he didn't want to refute, but Liangzu's poor performance really made him feel ashamed to refute. The sect was full of such mediocre disciples. The future of the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island was really worrying. The other disciples of the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island also felt ashamed. In this way, Liangzu's performance in the field suddenly became even worse. He was under a lot of pressure, so he performed so abnormally because of nervousness. Now, being pointed at by others, he became more and more nervous. Originally, he could only use 70% of his strength, but now he didn't even have 50%. The situation became completely one-sided. Liangzu could barely hold on for a while, but now he had no strength to fight back. The winner was about to be decided. I can't lose. I absolutely can't lose. Being forced to the point of no retreat, Liangzu began to become hysterical. He didn't care about Lung Lung's continuous attacks at all. He forcibly began to fight back crazily with the attitude of exchanging injuries for injuries. When the pressure reached the critical point, some people would completely collapse, or even become hysterical, while some people would be reborn like a phoenix in nirvana. Obviously, Liangzu was definitely not the latter. If Liangzu adopted this tough attitude of exchanging injuries for injuries at the beginning, it would be a wise strategy. After all, he had the absolute advantage in strength. Although it was inevitable that he would consume a lot of energy, and even leave serious injuries, as far as this battle was concerned, his chances of winning were actually higher than Lung Lung's. Unfortunately, he didn't have such awareness. Chapter 5192. He was completely restricted by Lung Lung's broken ice physique. Lung Lung didn't give him a chance to fight head-on. In this case, even if Liangzu was in his peak state, he had no chance, not to mention that he had lost control of his emotions. The result was as everyone expected. Liangzu's hysterical and crazy counterattack didn't bring him a chance to turn things around. Instead, it only made Lung Lung more proficient and made him lose faster. Xin Yijie and the other disciples of the Green Cloud sect were speechless. Although Liangzu was not a genius disciple, he had always been steady. It was rare to see him perform abnormally. Today's performance was useless from beginning to end, which was something that had never happened before. It was really shameful in front of everyone. Thump. Liangzu was once again kicked out by Lung Lung, and he struggled for a long time without being able to get up. A normal person in his situation would have already chosen to admit defeat. Liangzu was not the kind of person who would stubbornly persist to the end, but at this moment, he had been struck out of his wits. Except for some subconscious movements, he had already completely forgotten about admitting defeat. Seeing Liangzu's state, Lung Lung couldn't help but frown slightly. She and Liangzu didn't have any relationship in the past or the present, so naturally, she wanted to stop. She didn't want to be ruthless, but Liangzu didn't want to admit defeat. She could only continue to fight until Lai Yingzu admitted defeat or was knocked unconscious. Unexpectedly, just as Lung Lung was about to knock him out, her entire body froze all of a sudden. The aura around her began to surge wildly. The inexplicable aura made the surrounding people secretly shocked. Not only that, the crowd even felt that this scene was somewhat familiar. No way. Lin Yi was the first to react. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This girl was going to repeat the scene of her breakthrough on the spot. Soon, the other people also reacted. They looked at each other and cried out in shock, "She's going to break through again? Didn't she just break through the day before yesterday? What's going on? One breakthrough after one match? Really?" Even Shui Jianfeng was dumbfounded. In the last match, she broke through from the later stage of Foundation Establishment Realm to the peak of the later stage of Foundation Establishment Realm. If everything went well this time, she would break through from the peak of Foundation Establishment Realm to the great completion of Foundation Establishment Realm. Wasn't this leveling speed too exaggerated? Unbeknownst to him, Lung Lung had consumed a few supreme-grade foundation building pills that Lin Yi had given her during her closed-door training for the past few months. Although she did not directly break through to the next level, it had left a huge amount of undigested medicinal power in her body. If it was just her usual cultivation, perhaps it would take a few months for the medicinal efficacy to be completely released. However, it just so happened that she was in time for the grand contest. Facing a strong opponent of the same level, especially in the tense atmosphere of the contest, Lung Lung's essence, qi, and spirit were all adjusted to the best state. Under such circumstances, it was easy for the medicinal efficacy to be released in advance. Naturally, the breakthrough on the spot would be a matter of course. Lung Lung. One Lung Lung. On one, Lung Lung. Lin Yi knew about the inside story, but the others didn't. They thought it was purely because of Lung Lung's superb aptitude. She was more than a genius, she was a super genius among geniuses. For a while, Lung Lung's position in everyone's heart was raised by a lot. She was originally a genius disciple with a little fame. Now, she had become the leading figure of the young generation in the immemorial martial world, just like Ling Tianyu of the 1,000 blades flying together. The process of breakthrough could be long or short. If it was purely a good preparation, it might just be a matter of a blink of an eye. However, Lung Lung was breaking through for the second time in 3 days. No matter how much medicine was accumulated in her body, the whole process of breakthrough was difficult to be smooth. Just like now, Lung Lung's aura was obviously unstable. It seemed that even if she could break through successfully, it would take a lot of time. However, the crowd didn't show the slightest dissatisfaction. It was a rare experience for them to be able to see Lung Lung's legendary breakthrough in one match. This was an excellent topic for them to brag to others in the future. However, in the process of waiting, Lai Yingzu, who had lost his soul, finally came to his senses. When he saw Lung Lung not far from him, he subconsciously made a counterattack, which immediately caused a burst of exclamation from the crowd. Bastard! A murderous intent flashed in Lin Yi's eyes. He was about to make a move to get rid of this reckless trash. However, before he made a move, Shin Yijie had already rushed into the field. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and slapped Lai Yingzu away. "Uncle Shin, what are you doing?" Shui Jianfeng said with dissatisfaction. He couldn't wait for Lai Yingzu to interrupt Lung Lung's breakthrough. At that time, not only would Lung Lung not be able to advance to the next level, she would also suffer a serious backlash. If she was unlucky, she might even lose her life. This was a great thing for him, but he didn't expect that it would be destroyed by Shin Yijie. Just as you can see, Shin Yijie's face was extremely gloomy at the moment. If Lai Yingzu was only a disgrace to the Green Cloud sect because of his lack of strength, he would at most be ridiculed as a talent. However, now he actually did such a shameless thing. It was unbearable. If he didn't make a move and Lai Yingzu interrupted Lung Lung's breakthrough, the entire Green Cloud sect of the North Island would be nailed to the pillar of shame and become the laughingstock of the entire archaic Jianghu. Not only that, it was bound to greatly offend Lin Yi. Shin Yijie even seriously suspected that if he didn't make a move first to slap Lai Yingzu away, this guy might have already become a corpse. "Uncle Shin, Although you're the leader of the team, you're also the only referee of the contest. Is it appropriate for you to interfere in the process of the contest without any disguise? Shui Jianfeng sneered. In his opinion, this was a ready-made blackmail. Everyone looked at Xin Yijie. As a referee, he must always be an absolutely objective and neutral third party. Logically speaking, as long as the contest was not over, including Xin Yijie as a referee, no one could interfere in anything in the field. Even if Lai Yingzu's sneak attack during Lung Lung's breakthrough was despicable and shameless, it was still allowed by the rules. Xin Yijie's action was indeed too arbitrary. Chapter 5193. This. Shui Jianfeng choked and forced himself to say, that's also against the rules. Well, if you insist, you can report it to the Archaic Alliance. Xin Yijie glanced at him. Shui Jianfeng snorted and gave up resentfully. Of course, he could not let go of Xin Yijie's weakness, but even if he really reported it to the Archaic Alliance, it would be useless. Because this was human nature. Except for the shameless Lai Yingzu, what Xin Yijie did was a happy thing for everyone else. The Archaic Alliance would never come forward to punish him, otherwise, it would be seen as encouraging Lai Yingzu's shameless behavior. After a while, Lung Lung finally succeeded in breaking through. Under the envious gaze of the crowd, she officially advanced to the Foundation Establishment Perfected Realm and became the person who truly stood at the top of all the disciples of the Archaic Alliance. He had the shattered ice physique to begin with, and now, he had become a legend. Other than Ling Tianyu and Shui Jianfeng, there was no one else present who could compare to him. Even Duanmu Yu and the others might be slightly inferior to him. This was the true meaning of having boundless prospects. Miss Lung Lung, I'm really sorry just now. I apologize to you on behalf of the Green Cloud sect of the North Island. Xin Yijie walked in front of her and bowed deeply with a solemn expression. Ah! Lung Lung was stunned. She was fully focused on breaking through just now, so she did not notice Lai Yingzu's little action at all, and did not know what happened after that. It was only until Lin Yi walked over and explained in a low voice that Lung Lung finally understood. She quickly said, Master Xin, you're being too serious. You don't have to apologize to me. Actually, I should be the one thanking you properly. No matter what, you're the one who protected me. Even if Xin Yijie did not step forward, Lai Yingzu could not hurt Lung Lung at all. After all, Lin Yi was watching. However, Xin Yijie still did her a big favor. No matter what his consideration was, Lung Lung was the biggest beneficiary. There was no doubt about this. Miss Lung Lung is too polite. That's what I should do. Xin Yijie smiled bitterly and nodded to Lin Yi. He then announced to the crowd that the competition would continue. The rest of the competition was uneventful, and a day later, it was Lingshan and the others' turn. This time, most of them passed without any mishap. After the first round, they were much more used to the new level of foundation establishment, and the counter moves Lin Yi had taught them were much more proficient as well. Naturally, they were more at ease when facing opponents of the same level as them. This time, other than their own people, the only one who lost was Ziyu. This girl got Yu Bing in the first round and got a win for free. It looked like she was lucky, but it was actually a loss. If she had gone all out in the first round like the others instead of just going through the motions, she might not have lost the second round. Strictly speaking, her opponent wasn't that strong, and the only reason she lost was because she wasn't used to the early phase of foundation establishment and the atmosphere. She still had to pay the tuition fee. But this wasn't a bad thing. After this loss, Ziyu had matured a lot. Compared to success, most of the time, failure was more motivating. Especially for a little girl like Ziyu who didn't know how high the sky was, this experience was even more valuable. Lin Yi smiled as he looked at Ziyu, who was training extra. This was good, too. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't always protect everyone under his wing. If even the youngest Ziyu was starting to realize this, then the others wouldn't slack off either. After all, if they couldn't even beat Ziyu, then they'd really lose face. This was quite a pleasant surprise. In the third round, the number of people who signed up for the cross-level challenge was less than half of the second round. There were only 3 people in total. At this time, everyone had more or less understood each other. In order to succeed in challenging someone of a higher level, other than having sufficient strength, there was another crucial condition, and that was to catch the opponent off guard. Only then would it be possible for the stronger opponent to fail miserably. Otherwise, if everyone knew each other thoroughly, the originally small chance of victory would be even slimmer. Just like that, many of the disciples who had the impulse to challenge him gave up spontaneously. However, even though the number of people had decreased, the challengers had clearly become much stronger. Those who still had the guts to challenge him at this time were naturally not easy to deal with. Of the 3 cross-level battles, although only one of them succeeded in the end, from the looks of it, the other 2 battles were also evenly matched. The 2 challengers' chances of winning were actually not low. It was just that their luck was not too good, which led to them losing in the end. I didn't think so at first, but now that I look at it, the rules of this tournament are really cruel. One of the disciples sighed, and the others sighed as well. Even Lin Yi couldn't help but nod. There were a total of 6 people in the 3 battles, but there was only one winner out of the 6, and that was the challenger who succeeded in the cross-level challenge. As for the other 5, they probably didn't have a good ending. The one who succeeded in the cross-level challenge didn't need to be mentioned. According to the rules, he was already eliminated. As for the remaining 4, the results weren't as direct, but the process was too intense. All 4 of them were injured quite badly, and unless they had some strong elixir like the Great Recovery Pill, they wouldn't be able to recover in a short period of time. If this trend continued, not only would they not be able to win the 3rd round, but even the 4th and 5th rounds wouldn't be good either. If they lost all 3 rounds, they would naturally be eliminated. Just 3 rounds had eliminated 5 people. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the rules were cruel. The higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance had racked their brains to come up with these rules. Those who were able to stand out under these cruel rules, no matter how strong they were, at the very least, they weren't weaklings unless they were extremely lucky. But then again, for a trial like the Archaic Trials that was full of chance, luck was also a part of one's strength. To put it nicely, luck was also a part of one's strength. Chapter 5194. Due to Lung Lung's breakthrough, the number of disciples in the foundation-building realm full cycle was restored to 8. Of course, this was only temporary. Everyone knew that this kind of competition would get more intense as time went on, and the probability of casualties would increase. Xin Yijie immediately began to draw lots for everyone. Everyone was looking forward to it. With Lin Yi, Xue Jianfeng, and Lung Lung, the 3 gimmick characters, in addition to Duan Muyu and other powerful disciples from various sects, the battle between the disciples in the foundation-building realm full cycle would be interesting. Everyone would not miss it. In this group, the most anticipated match was none other than the pinnacle battle between Lin Yi and Xue Jianfeng. It was a pity that this round of drawing didn't fulfill everyone's wishes, but the result didn't disappoint them too much, because this time, Xue Jianfeng's opponent was Lung Lung, who had just broken through. Interesting, really interesting. Both of them are genius disciples of the Snow Sword sect, and they have a grudge against each other. This is a civil war in the Snow Sword sect. Everyone was delighted. They were the typical spectators. However, for Lung Lung, the result of drawing lots was not that fun. As a disciple of the same sect, she was quite familiar with Xue Jianfeng's strength. Although they were on the same level in name, she had just broken through to the foundation-building realm full cycle. Obviously, she could not be compared with Xue Jianfeng. This battle would not bode well for her. Lung Lung, you have to be prepared to admit defeat. This guy's strength is not what you expected. Lin Yi suddenly pulled Lung Lung aside and reminded her softly. What do you mean? Lung Lung was shocked when she heard that. She indeed felt that the outcome of this battle was not optimistic, but she had the unique gift of the shattered ice physique after all. Facing Xue Jianfeng, who was also in the foundation-building great circle, it was not that she had no chance of winning at all. At least she still had a chance to fight, but Lin Yi's words clearly said that she would definitely lose. There's something I haven't told you. Actually, Xue Jianfeng's current strength is not in the foundation-building realm full cycle, but in the Gold Core realm, said Lin Yi. Gold Core realm full cycle? Lung Lung was stunned for a moment. If her opponent was a foundation-building full cycle, she would definitely stand a chance against him. However, He was only a beginner-stage gold core cultivator. She quickly lowered her voice and exclaimed in astonishment, how could he be a beginner-stage gold core cultivator? Breaking through to the gold core realm was many times more difficult than breaking through to the foundation realm. Even with the spiritual chi conditions of the transition islands, one had to have medicinal pills like the gold core realm. However, medicinal pills like the gold core realm could only be obtained after passing the sect special test, and then approved by the Elders Guild after a discussion. Shui Jianfeng had clearly not passed the test, so how could he have the gold core realm? That's because he betrayed the Snow Sword School and secretly sought refuge with the center. He consumed the medicinal pills given by the center, which allowed him to recover his dantian and meridians. At the same time, his strength increased by a great deal. He broke through from great completion of foundation establishment to early gold core stage. Lin Yi explained. In order to prevent people from gossiping, he did not mention these things to the others previously. However, he had no choice but to say it in front of Cooled. What? Cooled was extremely shocked. Shui Jianfeng had always insisted that he was a traitor. She did not expect that he was the real traitor. Don't tell anyone about this first. Just pretend that you don't know anything. I'll explain the rest to you later. I have my own arrangements, Lin Yi reminded. Cooled was stunned for a long time before she finally digested this shocking inside story. She took a deep breath and nodded heavily. I understand. Ian, and you must be careful. Shui Jianfeng does not have good intentions. He will definitely find an opportunity to deal a heavy blow to you later. He might even take your life directly. So you must not force yourself. Surrender immediately when the situation is not good. Understand? Lin Yi said seriously. He was very clear that Shui Jianfeng was already unscrupulous in order to strike him down. He had been thinking of ways to get people to deal a killing blow to Lingshan and the others. Although he did not succeed, this guy had never given up. Now that he had the chance to face Cooled directly, he would definitely not give up. Don't worry. I know what I'm doing, Cooled nodded. Hey, what are you two whispering about again? Can we start now? Shui Jianfeng shouted from afar. He finally had the chance to deal with Cooled with his own hands. This was really a blessing from the heavens. He could not wait any longer. Cooled and Lin Yi looked at each other. They immediately stepped into the arena and said indifferently, please. Sure. Although both of us are disciples of the Snow Sword School, we have never really fought before. Shui Jianfeng smiled coldly with a playful expression. This was a matter of course. No matter how much Cooled was valued by the higher-ups of the school, her strength level was still too low. She was only at the early stage of foundation building before she came out to the secular world to train. Shui Jianfeng, on the other hand, was at the full cycle of foundation building. Their strengths were not on the same level at all. Naturally, there was no point in sparring with each other. So what? Cooled looked at him coldly. Then I'll take this opportunity to have a taste of your ice shatter physique. I hope you won't disappoint me too much, Shui Jianfeng said disdainfully. If it was in the past, he would still be a little afraid of Cooled, who was at the full cycle of foundation building. However, it was completely different now. Same to you. Cooled's expression was still as calm as usual. In the eyes of others, they would think that she was holding back her strength to defeat Shui Jianfeng. Even Shui Jianfeng was fooled by her. She secretly sneered in her heart. I'll let you taste the taste of despair later. After Xin Yijie's announcement, the duel between the two officially began. However, to everyone's surprise, there was not the fiery atmosphere that everyone expected at the beginning. Both Shui Jianfeng and Leng Leng did not act rashly. Both of them had chosen to strike after the other. Shui Jianfeng relied on his overwhelming strength advantage. To him, it did not matter whether he struck first or later. However, unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not want to expose his strength at the early stage of Gold Core. Therefore, he chose this strategy to force Cooled to strike first. Then, he would wait for an opportunity to counterattack. This guy is a lot more experienced. Lin Yi could not help but raise his eyebrows at the scene. Chapter 5195. The situation made Leng Leng frown. She was also thinking of retreating in order to advance. After all, her strength was at a disadvantage. This was the most reasonable choice for her, but she did not expect Xue Jianfeng to be so calm. In the silent confrontation, the atmosphere suddenly became oppressive and tense. If one's willpower was slightly weaker, even a simple bystander would feel suffocated, let alone the two people who were confronting each other in the field. The longer the confrontation, the greater the pressure. When it reached a certain point, the pressure was enough to crush one alive. In the end, one would even lose the courage to attack and become a real defeated soldier. Of course, this was definitely not Xue Jianfeng's plan. What he wanted was not just a victory, but Lung Lung's life. If he really forced Lung Lung to admit defeat, it would be a complete failure for him. Finally, after the two of them confronted each other for the time it took to burn a stick of incense, Lung Lung finally took the initiative to move. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. With every step she took, her speed suddenly increased. After 10 steps, not only did her speed increase to the extreme, even her aura had also climbed to the peak. Smart. Xin Yijie's eyes lit up. The others did not understand it, but he understood the deep meaning behind it. Lin Yi nodded as well. Cooled was indeed very smart. The confrontation just now wasn't a good thing for her. Due to the difference in strength between them, it was impossible for her to be more composed than Xue Jianfeng. On the contrary, it had unknowingly worn down his most important drive and confidence, to the extent that he had already lost before he even made a move. Anyone with a discerning eye could see the advantages and disadvantages. Naturally, Lung Lung herself was clear about it. However, this was her established strategy. She could not mess up the moment she started. Therefore, even if she had to bite the bullet, she could only confront Xue Jianfeng. When she reached the limit of her endurance for the time it took to burn a stick of incense, she did not rashly make the first move. Instead, she came up with this method to regroup herself. In just 10 steps, she had regained the peak aura she had when she fought with her opponent. To be able to do this under such huge pressure, Lung Lung was indeed not simple. If it was someone else, it would be hard for them not to collapse on the spot, just like Lai Yingzu who made a fool of himself in the previous round. H, you're quite something. Xue Jianfeng was also very surprised, but he immediately sneered disdainfully. Even so, it's still a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Can you stop it? Although Cooled Lung's performance was eye-catching, it could not change the fact that she was forced to make a move. In terms of strategy alone, she had actually fallen into a passive position. In the face of an opponent like Xue Jianfeng, it was obviously unrealistic to strike first. Even if Cooled had recovered to her peak condition, the series of attacks that came head-on could not hurt Xue Jianfeng at all. Xue Jianfeng did not even unsheath his sword as he easily dodged all of her punches and kicks. This formed a sharp contrast with the previous battle between Lung Lung and Lai Yingzu. The same attack made Lai Yingzu breathless until he was finally defeated. But now, it didn't cause any threat to Xue Jianfeng. This was the huge gap in strength. You're being praised to the point of being a god. Could it be that you only have this much? Isn't this a little too disappointing? Xue Jianfeng mocked. Lung Lung ignored him and continued to attack ferociously. Even though she knew that she could not hurt her opponent, she did not have the slightest intention of giving up. I know, she's trying to form a snow form. Someone among the spectators finally came to a realization. Xue Jianfeng's series of dodging movements were undoubtedly elegant and calm, but at the same time, it also gave Lung Lung the opportunity to form a snow form easily. After the previous 2 rounds of competition, everyone had a deep impression of the strength of the snow form. Are you stupid? What's the use of forming a snow form in front of Xue Jianfeng? Someone immediately retorted. In terms of controlling the fire of the snow form, Xue Jianfeng was definitely far more experienced than Lung Lung. Using the snow form to deal with others might be useful, but to use it against Xue Jianfeng, it was simply showing off in front of an expert. Perhaps one would even shoot oneself in the foot. That's right. Moreover, Lung Lung has the shattered ice physique. Why would she need to put in so much effort to form a snow form? Someone else chimed in. After all, in terms of restraining effect, the shattered ice physique was far more unique than the snow form. Moreover, it was more difficult to defend against. If Lung Lung really did that, she would be neglecting the essentials. She would not do such a meaningless and stupid thing. However, if it's not for forming a snow form, then what is she doing now? Is she just struggling in vain? Everyone had a puzzled look on their faces. They did not know the true strength of Xue Jianfeng. From their point of view, although Lung Lung had just achieved a breakthrough, she was still a prodigy with the shattered ice physique. Moreover, she had also created a legend of one breakthrough after another. Therefore, she must be at the same level as Xue Jianfeng. Even if Lung Lung was slightly weaker in terms of strength, the difference would not be too huge. It was impossible for her to be so powerless in the current situation where she could not even touch the corner of Xue Jianfeng's clothes, right? No one would believe such a thing, except for Xue Jianfeng himself. Although he had yet to fully display the true strength of an early-stage gold core cultivator, even so, he was not a match for an ordinary foundation-perfected disciple. It was more than enough to deal with Lung Lung's level of attack. Just like that, Lung Lung had continuously attacked Xue Jianfeng for 20 times. Xue Jianfeng was still unscathed. Just when everyone thought that he was going to continue dodging in a playful manner, he suddenly unsheathed his snow sword. His first move was the Snow Sword sect's iconic snow form. Xin Yijie's expression changed. Although Xue Jianfeng did not display his strength of an early-stage gold core cultivator, and the others did not notice anything unusual, Xin Yijie was an early-stage gold core expert. He could more or less sense something unusual, but he could not react in time. This guy is really full of confidence. Lin Yi could not help but laugh and shake his head. Xue Jianfeng's snow form was indeed very sudden. In terms of power, it was considered top-notch among the foundation-perfected level. An ordinary person would not be able to withstand it. However, he was facing Lung Lung after all. Was this an ordinary opponent? Sure enough, Xue Jianfeng revealed his killing intent at this moment. However, Lung Lung seemed to be prepared for it. She had already retreated a moment before Xue Jianfeng struck. Xue Jianfeng was slightly stunned. He seemed to be a little surprised. The snow form was a technique that could easily reveal its flaws. His stunned reaction made the flaw even more obvious. Good chance. The spectators' eyes lit up. Chapter 5196. Ch, so careful. Aren't you a little too timid? Xue Jianfeng snorted. He had indeed miscalculated the snow killing style in the beginning, but the obvious flaw that was exposed later was deliberate. He wanted to use this opportunity to bait Lung Lung into taking the bait. As long as Lung Lung advanced rashly, he had absolute confidence that he could kill her with one strike. At worst, he would just reveal his gold core realm in public. However, since Lung Lung insisted on not taking the bait, he dared not act rashly. Otherwise, if Lung Lung was lucky enough to escape but exposed his strength at the same time, his wishful thinking would be in vain. By then, Lung Lung would definitely admit defeat in public, and he would not have the chance to attack again. You talk too much nonsense. Lung Lung had already attacked again. Her attacks were as violent as the beginning, but she still could not hurt Xue Jianfeng at all. Is that so? You may not hear this nonsense in the future. For you, this might be your last life experience. Xue Jianfeng grinned meaningfully, and then kept his snow sword again, returning to the initial situation. He was now like a patient beast, waiting for the moment his prey showed a flaw, and then pounced on it. Before that, he had to keep his claws to avoid scaring his prey away. What is she doing? Bing Wuqing was secretly puzzled as she watched this scene. As a chess piece that Lin Yi had secretly subdued, of course, he knew that Lung Lung must have known the difference in strength between him and the enemy. Logically speaking, there were only two choices in this situation. Either she admitted defeat as soon as the fight started, which should be the safest way to ensure her safety, or she chose to admit defeat after putting on an act for a while. This was more or less risky, but it could be used to numb Xue Jianfeng and let him continue to think that his strength had not been exposed. However, what Lung Lung was doing now had completely exceeded the level of putting on an act. All of her attacks seemed futile, but they were definitely not meaningless struggles. There had to be a reason behind it. It was just that Bing Wuqing couldn't figure out what exactly she wanted to do at the moment. It was normal that he could not figure it out. Other than Lung Lung herself, only Lin Yi knew the answer to this question, because he was the one who helped Lung Lung research and develop this trump card. In the blink of an eye, the two of them exchanged over a dozen moves. Just as Xue Jianfeng's patience was about to run out, Lung Lung suddenly asked, "How many moves have you made?" "What?" Xue Jianfeng was stunned. He subconsciously replied, 32 moves. "That's enough." Lung Lung nodded. Then, she suddenly stopped moving and said faintly from 3 steps away, "I'll let you try out my new move, prison drawing." As soon as he finished speaking, Xue Jianfeng felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. As a disciple of the Snow Sword School, he had sufficient resistance to the cold, but at this moment, he truly felt what was called bone-piercing cold. This was no longer a problem of his movement technique being affected. If he could not break free in time, even he would definitely be frozen to death. Prison on the ground? Looking at Xue Jianfeng's strange posture of being frozen in an instant, everyone was collectively shocked. Each of them looked at Lung Lung as if they were looking at a monster. Could it be that all her previous struggles were not in vain, but in preparation for this prison on the ground? Upon seeing the situation, Lin Yi could not help but reveal a satisfied smile. Lung Lung's biggest reliance was naturally her ice-shattering physique. However, she had never been able to truly unleash the power of her unique move. If she was still in the early stage of foundation building, it would not be a big deal. However, she was now in the full circle of foundation building after a series of breakthroughs, and was about to break through to the golden core stage. If she did not even have a basic trump card, it would be unjustifiable. Once she encountered a strong opponent, she would be at a great disadvantage. Therefore, Lin Yi had already begun to plan and design for Lung Lung a few months ago. After continuous attempts and improvements, it was only right before the start of the training tournament that the results were finalized. However, the opponents that Lung Lung encountered in the early stage of Golden Core stage were not strong enough, so it could not be used. It was only until she encountered Xue Jianfeng, a strong opponent in the early stage of Golden Core stage, that it could finally be put to use. By subtly integrating the characteristic of ice-shattering physique into her vital energy, and then using a special method to cause the vital energy to remain after it was released. As the vital energy itself was not strong, its lethality was not strong either. Naturally, a strong opponent like Xue Jianfeng would not pay attention to it. He would not notice that the residual vital energy was following him. When it accumulated to a certain extent, it would become a strange prison that followed him like a shadow. By the time Lung Lung fully unleashed the characteristic of ice-shattering physique, even Xue Jianfeng would not be able to withstand the bone-chilling coldness of the prison. Moreover, he could not shake it off even if he wanted to, nor could he escape from it even if he wanted to. This was the prison of drawing ground. Even though it was a newly created technique and there was still a lot of room for improvement in the future, the prison of drawing ground was enough to fully unleash the advantage of the ice-shattering physique. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was Lung Lung's unique trump card. If she was only facing an opponent of the same level, Lung Lung did not have to go through so much trouble to cast the prison of drawing ground. She could easily release it in 3 to 5 moves. Its power was enough to freeze an opponent of the same level to death. However, Xue Jianfeng was an early-stage Golden Core stage expert. 3 to 5 moves were obviously not enough. That was why Lung Lung did not care about anything and used a total of 32 moves to create this extreme version of the prison of drawing ground. Lung Lung was initially worried whether this technique would be effective or not. After all, this was not an ordinary battle against an opponent of a higher level, but an actual battle against an opponent of a higher realm. Even the extreme version of the prison of drawing ground might not be effective. However, after seeing Xue Jianfeng's condition, her heart that was hanging in suspense was immediately relieved. It was not just effective, it was simply too effective. If Xue Jianfeng could not think of a way to break the prison of drawing ground in time, he would definitely be frozen to death on the spot after a while. Amazing. Bing Wuqing glanced at Lin Yi discreetly. Her heart was filled with reverence. Even though the prison of drawing ground was Lung Lung's unique technique, in her opinion, the one who was truly amazing was still Lin Yi. Compared to the prison of drawing ground itself, this unrestrained creativity was the truly fearsome thing. His profound understanding of vital energy was definitely not a realm that a mere foundation-building expert could have. Even Golden Core Stage and nascent Soul Stage experts might not be able to have such a profound understanding. Thinking back to the miraculous abilities that Lin Yi had displayed previously, Bing Wuqing could not help but be shocked once again. Who exactly was this person? Chapter 5197. This was under the condition that they did not know Xue Jianfeng's true strength. Otherwise, they would have gone crazy collectively. What a pity, it's still lacking a little. Lin Yi shook his head imperceptibly. He was also shocked that the confinement spell could be so powerful. However, it was Lung Lung's first time using it in public. She was still not proficient enough. She was still lacking if she wanted to strangle Xue Jianfeng, an early-stage Golden Core expert. As expected, as soon as Lin Yi's voice died away, there was a sudden change in the field. Xue Jianfeng let out a series of deafening roars. Then, the veins all over his body twitched violently. An unprecedented and inexplicable aura was released from his body. Everyone was stunned and looked at each other. Even Xin Yijie cried out involuntarily, early-stage gold core. He's already in the early-stage gold core. Although with Xue Jianfeng's strength as the #1 foundation-building expert, it was only a matter of time for him to break through to the gold core realm. If it happened in the ancient underworld, they would at most be surprised and would not be so shocked. However, the problem was that they were in the transit islands. Where did Xue Jianfeng get his gold core and when did he break through to the gold core realm? Why was there no movement at all? After a while, Xue Jianfeng finally moved freely again. It seemed that he had completely broken free from the prison on ground. His expression was terrible. He immediately pounced at Lung Lung with a ferocious look. In fact, it was no wonder that he was angry. This time, not only did he fail to take the opportunity to kill Lung Lung, but he was also forced to expose his gold core realm strength in public. To him, it was like going for wool and coming home shorn. I admit defeat. Lung Lung was already prepared for this. She immediately exited the field and shouted. According to the rules of the competition, as long as one of the two parties admitted defeat on the spot, they were not allowed to make any further attacks. However, Xue Jianfeng deliberately turned a deaf ear to it. Not only did he expose his gold core realm strength, but he was also frozen by Lung Lung's prison on ground. It was intolerable. Even if he had to break the rules, he had to kill her with one slash. Lung Lung was shocked. The extreme version of the prison on ground had consumed too much of her physical strength and vital energy. Facing Xue Jianfeng, who was like a mad beast, she had no strength to resist at all. However, before Xue Jianfeng could charge over, another figure arrived far faster than him. It was Lin Yi. Lin Yi had long guessed that Xue Jianfeng wouldn't leave the matter at that. With the strength of his primordial spirit now, even though he didn't have the confidence to fight against an Aurus core stage expert that was a whole realm higher, he still had an endless amount of miraculous tricks up his sleeves. It was enough to deal with Xue Jianfeng. Damn it! Xue Jianfeng was taken aback by Lin Yi's speed. If it wasn't for the orders from above, he would have taken the opportunity to kill Lin Yi and Lung Lung, killing two birds with one stone. Stop! At this time, Xin Yijie also intervened. He looked at Xue Jianfeng with full vigilance as if he was facing a formidable enemy. If Xue Jianfeng was still in the great completion of Foundation Establishment realm, he naturally would not be so nervous. However, he had to be careful when facing an expert of the same level. If Xue Jianfeng really made up his mind to do something reckless, he, as the leader of the team, would be in trouble. Xue Jianfeng finally stopped. Xin Yijie was also a strong opponent of the same level to him. Moreover, there was also Lin Yi, who was no less troublesome than Xin Yijie. In addition to that, there was also Lung Lung's prison drawing. If he continued to force his way, he was destined to suffer a great loss. He had no choice but to stop. However, Xin Yijie did not plan to let him go just like that. He scolded, Lung Lung has already admitted defeat, but you still want to kill her. What's your intention? Do you really think that the rules of the trial competition are just for show? Are you trying to challenge the dignity of the entire Archaic Alliance? Xin Yijie, don't you dare put shit on my head. My ears were frostbitten just now, so I didn't hear it. Shui Jianfeng said indifferently. Since he had shown his strength of the early gold core stage, there was naturally no need to call Xin Yijie master. As an expert of the same level, he only needed to call Xin Yijie by his name. This was the custom of the archaic underworld. Really? Xin Yijie obviously did not believe him. If you don't believe me, why don't you have a taste of her prison of drawing? Shui Jianfeng snorted and curled his lips. What he said was a random excuse, but it was true that he was frostbitten by the prison of drawing. Moreover, it was not an ordinary injury. If he did not take good care of it, there would be repercussions. Of course, Xin Yijie would not believe his nonsense. However, since Shui Jianfeng had said so, he could not continue to insist. He could only go along with the flow and said, "Since you didn't hurt Lung Lung, I'll turn a blind eye this time. You're on your own." Shui Jianfeng snorted and turned away without any appreciation. His priority now was to find a place to heal his injuries. It would be best if he could get some healing elixirs from the glasses professor. Unfortunately, everything was not going well for him. Not only did he fail to kill the people around Lin Yi according to his plan, but he was also injured due to his carelessness. Moreover, it was from the hands of Lung Lung, who had just reached the great perfection of Foundation Establishment realm. He really did not have the face to meet the glasses professor. Fortunately, he had won all 3 rounds and was qualified to participate in the trial. It would not matter even if he took his time to heal his injuries. The trial continued. Although the following duels also had a popular figure like Lin Yi, it was far less exciting than the first match because of his opponent. After all, Shui Jianfeng was a gold core stage master, and Lung Lung almost succeeded with the prison of drawing. It was a scene that had not been seen in the Archaic Alliance for decades. Even if it was a little dull at the beginning, it was still a rare classic duel. In comparison, the other duels of the great perfection of Foundation Establishment realm inevitably paled in comparison. Including Lin Yi's match, the remaining 3 duels of the great perfection of Foundation Establishment realm seemed to be lukewarm. Duan Muyu's match was relatively more interesting. Due to her loss to Lin Yi in the previous round, Duan Muyu's current record was 1 win and 1 loss. Therefore, this match was very important. It would be gratifying if she could successfully win, but if she lost, it would mean that she had to guarantee a complete victory in the next 2 rounds to qualify for the trial. Otherwise, she would be eliminated. Coincidentally, this time, her opponent, Lei Gong, also had 1 win and 1 loss. They were also determined to win this duel. If her opponent was Shui Jianfeng or Lin Yi, Lei Gong might choose to admit defeat early. After all, it was impossible for him to be a match for either of them. It was better to conserve his strength for the next round of duels. Chapter 5198. Lei Gong knew that he was not a weakling. Facing an opponent like Duan Muyu, it was not impossible for him to win. Especially in the second round, Lin Yi's method of cracking the scent of autumn had given him an excellent reference. It was no exaggeration to say that he had at least a 60% chance of winning. As expected, in this duel where he was determined to win, Duan Muyu used the signature move of falling leaves in autumn as soon as he came up. Under the chilling autumn intent, he instantly became invisible just like before. Haha, child's play. Lei Gong was prepared for this. Almost at the same moment when Duan Muyu's figure disappeared, he had already cut her waist with his hand, almost copying Lin Yi's method of cracking the move in the previous round. This hand knife did not focus on power but speed. As long as he could successfully cut Duan Muyu's waist, he would definitely win. Although there was a slight suspicion of imitating, it had to be said that his response was indeed a brilliant psychological attack. Moreover, his reaction and speed were sufficiently fast, and it was extremely easy for others to be caught off guard. However, to his surprise, his knife hand actually missed. His knife hand slashed across, but there was still nothing in front of him. In the next moment, a palm-sized dark steel leaf abruptly smashed into his back. Lei Gong was originally a huge, burly man, but after being hit by this leaf, he was actually sent flying on the spot, directly over the heads of the crowd and into the sea. In this way, he was naturally eliminated. A mountain of leaves. Xin Yijie's eyelids twitched. Although this move was far less famous than Scent of Autumn, it was one of the rare tough killer moves of the Yiling sect. Its power was top-notch in the foundation establishment stage. However, there were very few people in the Yiling sect who had truly mastered this move, so it was even more difficult for outsiders to see it. This was the first time Duanmu Yu had used this move in public. To be able to send a burly man like Lei Gong flying with one move, a mountain of leaves really lived up to its name. Seeing Duanmu Yu calmly walk to the side to meditate and recover her qi, everyone couldn't help but look at each other. This woman was as tough as a man, really not someone to be trifled with. With Scent of Autumn and a mountain of leaves, no one except for people like Lin Yi would be able to withstand it. The third round of the competition continued in an orderly manner. With the previous 2 rounds as a foreshadowing, the performance of the contestants in this round was significantly less probing attacks. They often used their trump cards right from the start, and the duels entered a white-hot stage right from the start. Basically, the winner could be decided in 2 or 3 moves. This way, they could save more stamina for the 4th and 5th round of the competition. It wasn't long before it was time for Lingshan and the others to go on stage again, and their performances were as dazzling as usual. Lingshan, Chentian, and the others won all 3 battles, getting the chance to participate in the test early. As for Kang Xiaobo and the others, they didn't win all 3 battles, but they managed to get 2 wins and 1 loss. The situation was pretty good. The only exception was Ying Ziyu. She was the only one who didn't have a good future. After 3 rounds, she won 1 and lost 2, and the only win was from Yu Bing in the first round. The other 2 were easily defeated by the Archaic Alliance disciples, and she couldn't use the counter moves Lin Yi taught her at all. If this continued, things wouldn't look good for her. Ziyu, Yu. Facing a situation like this, even Lin Yi didn't know what to do. He'd already done everything he could to come up with a counter move for the sects, and they only needed to memorize it in the exam room. But with Ziyu's situation, he couldn't possibly take the test himself, could he? Lin Yi bro, am I useless? Ziyu smiled bitterly. Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat as he looked at her. Although the girl was still forcing a smile on her face, tears were already welling up in her eyes. She was just trying her best not to let them fall. No. Lin Yi shook his head, feeling a little heartache as he looked at Ziyu pretending to be strong. He regretted it a little. At her age, he should have let her stay in the common world and enjoy her school life, but now he wanted to bring her to the archaic trials. Wasn't he being too hasty? It seems like I'll have to stay here alone this time, Ziyu said desolately. When Lin Yi brought up the idea of letting everyone participate in the archaic trials, she was the one who was the most eager to go. But from the looks of things now, she basically had no fate with the archaic trials anymore. Don't give up, you still have a chance. Lin Yi comforted. Lin Yi bro, you don't need to comfort me. I know my situation the best. It's impossible for me to win the next 2 rounds. Ziyu smiled bitterly. She could have placed her hopes on luck, since if she were lucky enough to get her own people in the next 2 rounds, she'd be guaranteed a spot in the test. It was a shame that Lingshan, Wu Chentian, and the others who'd won all 3 rounds had gotten the spot prematurely, and in order to prevent them from affecting the fairness of the test, they weren't allowed to participate in the lot drawing anymore. The only people who had a chance were Xiaobo and a few others. Not only was the chance very low, but even if they did get their people, Ziyu wouldn't be able to ask Kang Xiaobo and the others to go easy on her. After all, even Kang Xiaobo and the others wouldn't be guaranteed a spot in the trials. Lingshan and the others looked at each other. They wanted to comfort her, but they didn't know what to say. They knew that Ziyu had always been a headstrong person, and if they didn't say something right, not only wouldn't they be able to comfort her, it might even have the opposite effect. Nothing is impossible. You can't look at things from a pessimistic perspective. Although it's a pity that you've lost 2 matches in a row, if you look at it from an optimistic perspective, everything will be fine as long as you win 2 more matches, right? Plus, this situation isn't too bad. You might not be able to think of a solution on your own, but don't forget about me. Lin Yi smiled. You have a solution, Lin Yi bro? Ziyu's eyes lit up, but she shook her head. It's useless, I'm too useless. You've already taught me all the moves, but I can't help but get nervous when I'm in the field, and I forget everything when I'm nervous. I can't use any moves at all, I'm just a piece of trash. Chapter 5199. Solo Training? Ziyu paused, surprised. Is there enough time to do it now? The counter moves they learned before were just a last-minute effort, and they only used 3 days to learn them all. But they were in the middle of the tournament, and even if they had 2 days in between, it was only enough for them to recover their chi and stamina. Where would they find the time for solo training? There's enough time, of course there's enough time. This isn't something new, just a revision of the counter moves I taught you before. Lin Yi signaled for Ziyu to get on the boat and rowed it back to the Blue Cloud Sect's private island. Revision? Would that work? Ziyu wasn't confident at all. She was a fearless person, but things like exams were the only thing she couldn't do. This competition was like a test to her, and her mind was blank the moment she entered the exam room. Even if she memorized the counter moves now, it wouldn't work when the time came. Don't worry, this isn't just revision. It's made for you. Lin Yi smiled mysteriously. He'd found the problem now, and it wasn't hard to come up with a solution. Really? Ziyu only recovered now. She wasn't confident in herself, but in Lin Yi. If Lin Yi dared to say something like this, then he must have a way to help her get through this. On the other side, everyone watched as the two rowed away. Lingshan couldn't help but worry. Ziyu will be fine, right? Don't worry, she'll be fine with boss personally. We just need to wait and see, Chen Tian said without hesitation. The others looked at each other and smiled. Since Lin Yi said he'd bring everyone to the primordial trials, he wouldn't leave Ziyu behind. He'd never disappoint them, not in the past, not in the future. In the 4th round of the competition, Xue Jianfeng, Lin Yi, and the others who had won all 3 rounds had qualified early. There were also some who had lost all 3 rounds and were eliminated early. Adding on the losers who had been heavily injured in the previous rounds, there were clearly fewer disciples participating in this round. For example, there were 8 people in the last round, but only 5 were left in this round. Without Xue Jianfeng and Lin Yi, this round wasn't as exciting as before. Leng Leng and Duanmu Yu were the only ones left. The former was a genius disciple who almost used prison formation to turn the tables on a golden core master, and the latter was a senior sister who was slowly showing off the strength of Yiling's sect. Both of them were beauties, too, so it was a rare sight to see. Unfortunately, the 2 women did not encounter each other this time. However, what surprised everyone was that whether it was Cooled or Duan Muyu, they should be considered as the top existence among the remaining perfected foundation establishment experts. However, in the end, both of them were defeated at the same time. The 2 great perfection of Foundation Establishment Realm disciples who had drawn them had already accepted their fate after learning the results of the draw. After all, the strength that the 2 women had displayed earlier was indeed not to be underestimated. Ordinary experts of the same level basically had no chance of winning against them. Therefore, the 2 of them had only held on to the belief that they would definitely lose and had given it their all. They didn't think that they'd actually win. Not only were the bystanders flabbergasted, but even they themselves found it hard to believe. They felt that this victory was like a free win. It took them a long time to react, and they were overjoyed. What's going on? Lingshan and the others looked at each other. It was a pity that Lin Yi wasn't there, or he could explain it to them. Maybe she's exhausted too much qi in the first 3 rounds, and her stamina is low. Xin Yijie looked at them and said thoughtfully. Other than the silent Bing Wuqing, he should be the one who could see the situation the most, other than Leng Leng and Duanmu Yu. He was right. Leng Leng's strength was far from being consolidated because of the 2 consecutive breakthroughs in the first 2 rounds. Moreover, she used the extreme version of prison formation for the first time against Xue Jianfeng in the last round. This was a trump card that consumed a lot of qi and stamina. She didn't feel anything because she was excited at that time, but now the drawbacks were fully manifested. If she had been able to use prison drawing, there would have been almost no reason for her to lose the match just now. However, because she did not have enough true qi, she had a very obvious flaw when she used this move, which was why her opponent had turned defeat into victory. It was the same for Duanmu Yu. Whether it was falling leaves signifying autumn or a mountain leaf, they were both powerful moves that consumed a lot of qi and stamina. Moreover, every time she used it in a short period of time, it would consume more than the last time. Moreover, her opponent wasn't weak, so it was understandable that she lost in the end. The two girls behaved the same after losing the battle. They didn't say a word, and walked to an empty space at the side and began to meditate to recover their chi. Both of them had 2 wins and 2 losses now. The next 5th round of the competition would directly affect their future, so they had to make the best use of their time to recuperate and prepare for the last battle. Coincidentally, since Leng Leng and Duanmu Yu lost one after another, the 4th round of the competition seemed to be cursed. All kinds of dark horses kept appearing one after another. They obviously had the upper hand in strength, but they kept failing miserably. It was so strange. Shin Yijie wasn't surprised about this. As a senior elder of the Green Cloud sect in the North Island, he had presided over at least 80, if not 100, big or small competitions. He knew that in the middle and late stage of the competition, a lot of physical and chi would be consumed, and the spirit would unconsciously relax due to exhaustion. Therefore, it was the easiest time for accidents to happen. It wasn't strange for dark horses to appear again and again. A day later, it was finally the turn of the group in the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm in the 4th round of the competition. As the number of participating disciples decreased significantly due to various reasons, the process of the competition sped up a lot. The first round still needed 2 whole days to finish, but in the 4th round, it only took less than a day to finish all the previous matches. If Shin Yijie hadn't deliberately left some time for everyone to rest and recuperate between each group's matches, the time would be even shorter. After all, not only the number of matches was far less than before, but because everyone deliberately reduced the probing, the time of each match was also greatly shortened. This was a matter of course. Chapter 5200. Lin Yi said he was going to train Ziyu for 2 days, but it wasn't even 2 days and it was already time to draw lots. Didn't that mean that they'd forfeit and be eliminated? But it's too late now, right? Man, we've miscalculated. Yu Bing frowned. They should have realized this a long time ago, but because they trusted Lin Yi too much, they thought that something like this would be within Lin Yi's calculations. They forgot that the timing wasn't controllable, and even Lin Yi couldn't have predicted that it would be the Foundation Establishment Group's turn so soon. No matter what, I'll go find Boss and the others now. As long as I don't get the first match, it should be fine. My luck shouldn't be that bad, right? Chen Tian left. But before he could take 2 steps, Shin Yijie announced, Foundation Establishment Early Phase, First Match, Common World Ying Ziyu against Snowsword Sect's Luo Shosheng. What's going on? Chen Tian almost fell flat on his face, and Ling Shan and the others all had a pained expression on their faces. What should they do? At this time, Luo Shosheng was already walking onto the stage with a ferocious aura, looking at Ling Shan and the others with a vicious smile. He'd lost to Ling Shan's miraculous counterattack in the first round, and Ling Shan's attack had indeed hit his vitals, but it wasn't that heavy. Luo Shosheng had already recovered by the time the second round started, and he didn't meet anyone from Lin Yi's group in the next 3 rounds. Among all the Foundation Establishment disciples from the Archaic Alliance, Luo Shosheng's strength wasn't top-notch, but he was still a disciple of the Snowsword sect who could control the snow aspect. His strength wasn't to be underestimated, and as long as his luck wasn't too bad, he could beat most of his opponents. But perhaps because of Ling Shan, Luo Shosheng's strength had recovered, but his condition was affected quite a bit. He won 1 and lost 1 in the next 2 rounds, and while he wasn't directly eliminated, he had 1 foot on the edge of a cliff. There was no going back now. What a coincidence. It's a shame that it's not Ling Shan, but at least it gives me a chance to get my revenge. I can't wait. Luo Shosheng looked at Ling Shan, a little regretful. He couldn't accept losing to Ling Shan like that in the first round, and he'd been dreaming of meeting Ling Shan again in the next few rounds, but he didn't have the chance. He could only vent his anger on Ziyu now. Ling Shan and the others glared at him furiously. If it weren't for the tournament, they'd definitely teach this guy a lesson. If it weren't for Ling Shan going easy on him last time, he'd be a dead man by now. How dare he talk big like that? That was what he said, but it'd be a lie to say that he wasn't worried at all. With Ziyu's performance in the last few fights, this Luo Shosheng wouldn't stand a chance against her, especially since this guy had a grudge in his heart. He wouldn't let Ziyu give up so easily. The tournament begins. Disciples, please enter the stage. Shin Ijie saw that Ziyu wasn't entering the stage, so he turned around to urge her, but he didn't see her anywhere. He'd been interacting with Lingshan's group for the past few months, and he could still recognize her. He blinked. Where's Ying Ziyu? Under normal circumstances, all the disciples would wait at the side, no matter if it was time to go up or not. Even if they won all 3 fights and got the right to go up early, other than the heavily injured ones, most of them would stay here to watch the others fight. This was the first time someone like Ying Ziyu, who was clearly uninjured, had disappeared. Lingshan and the others looked at each other. She's going back for a bit, but she'll be back soon. Please wait for a bit. Then. All right. Shin Ijie nodded. This might not work if it was someone else, but Ziyu was Lin Yi's follower. She was his senior master, after all, and he had to give her some face. Luo Shisheng snorted discontentedly, but he dared not say anything more. He was not a big shot like Xue Jianfeng. He was merely a disciple in the early stage of Foundation establishment realm. How would he dare to put on airs in front of Shin Ijie, a gold core stage master uncle? Therefore, he could only endure it. Lingshan and the others breathed a sigh of relief, quickly sending Chentian to inform Lin Yi and Ying Ziyu. However, this place was quite far from the Blue Cloud Sex Island, and they had to row a boat. They wouldn't be able to get there without 2 incense sticks worth of time. Even Shin Ijie wouldn't be able to waste this much time, so he had to try his best. After the time it took to burn a stick of incense, the other disciples of the Archaic Alliance were getting impatient. If it was a big shot like Lin Yi who made them wait for so long, it would be understandable. However, it was just a weak little girl. Shin Ijie, as the leader of the team and the judge, was being so biased. Wasn't he being too selfish? Master Shin, we've waited long enough, right? If she doesn't come, are we supposed to keep waiting like this? Luo Shisheng finally asked. Yeah, according to the rules, anyone who doesn't show up on time forfeits. Waiting for an incense stick's worth of time is the limit. The flowers will wilt if we wait any longer, the others all agreed. That's. Shin Ijie looked at Lingshan and the others, troubled. From his perspective, he had tried his best, and he could only give a helpless expression. Since that's the case, then I'll announce that Ziyu has been late for too long, and will forfeit. Before he could finish, Ziyu's voice came from not far away. Sorry, I'm late. That's great. Seeing Lin Yi and Ziyu appear together, Lingshan and the others let out a breath of relief. Even Shin Ijie was the same. Only Luo Shisheng was a little disappointed. He wanted to use this chance to vent his anger on Ziyu, but in comparison, the test was more important. If he could win without any effort, then he'd be able to maintain his peak condition for the 5th round, and he'd have a much higher chance of entering the test. I'll be going then. Ziyu was no longer as nervous as before, smiling confidently as she raised her hand to Lin Yi. Okay, good luck. Lin Yi high-fived her. Chapter 5201. Mph, she's just a flower vase with no strength at all. Where's that confidence coming from? Luo Shisheng curled his lips in disdain. Ever since he lost to Lingshan, he'd been paying close attention to Lin Yi's group. After all, they were very likely to be the opponents they'd be drawn against, and he'd seen their performance from start to finish. If it were Lingshan and the others, he'd be worried, but since it was Ziyu, the weakest of them all, there was no need to worry. Ziyu will be fine, right? Lingshan worried. She knew Luo Shisheng's strength the best. He wasn't an easy opponent at the early phase of Foundation establishment. If she didn't fully grasp the counter moves Lin Yi taught her, she'd have a hard time. Ziyu, she. Lin Yi paused and smiled meaningfully. She's actually quite strong. Lingshan and the others paused, looking at each other. Lin Yi's standards had always been very high, and he'd never even commented on their performance like this before. Could Ziyu be an unparalleled genius for him to say that she was strong? At this time, the battle officially started. What surprised everyone was that Ziyu didn't follow the tactics and counter moves Lin Yi taught them, choosing to go on the offensive right from the start. This scene didn't just surprise everyone, even Luo Shisheng was shocked. But then he sneered. If you want to take the initiative, then you need to have the strength to do so. Do you have it? Luo Shisheng smiled coldly, and his signature weapon, the slaughter blade, came slashing down. Ziyu, however, was expecting it and dodged to the side, throwing a punch at his face. Luo Shisheng was shocked Ziyu was hitting his life point. How was that possible? If it was the snow-killing style, the most famous style of the snowsword faction, it was still acceptable for someone to lock on to his vital point. However, the traceless snow that he was using now was just an inconspicuous style. How could this woman have predicted it? She couldn't say that it was her spontaneous reaction, could she? That reaction speed was just too astonishing. Moreover, could an ordinary person study the moves of the snowsword school so thoroughly? Even the disciples of the snowsword school themselves might not be able to lock onto the vital points of the moves so quickly, right? Luckily, Traceless Snowground's flaw wasn't as obvious as Snowkill, and Luo Shisheng quickly changed his move. Ziyu didn't, still hitting the same spot, but Luo Shisheng easily blocked it. Does this woman not know how to be flexible? Luo Shisheng paused, and before he could react, Ziyu followed up with another attack, this one even faster than before. But this time, she didn't lock on to the life gate. Luo Shisheng quickly blocked again, but he didn't even have time to stop before Ziyu's third attack came even faster. She didn't lock on to the life gate as well, and it looked like a normal body part. Why did she choose such unimportant positions? What is this woman doing? Luo Shisheng was a bit stunned. Ziyu's attacks were abnormally fast, but they were easy to block. There was no threat at all. It was just that he had failed against Lingshan before, and even if Luo Shisheng looked down on Ziyu from the bottom of his heart, he didn't dare let his guard down against this random series of attacks. With the mentality of playing it safe, he started to defend. 7 to 8 moves in a row was the same, and Luo Shisheng was getting impatient. He'd seen through Ziyu already, and as weak as she was, everything before was just a bluff. With a thought, Luo Shisheng started to counterattack, but before he could even do it, Ziyu was already going for his life gate. He almost pissed his pants, going back to his defensive stance. This is. Lingshan was a bit weird looking at Ziyu's actions. She seemed to be using the counter moves Linyi taught her, but not completely. Other than the first move and this one, the rest weren't specific to the Snowsword sect. Other than the Snowsword sect, Ziyu seems to be using the counter moves of the other ancient sects as well. Boss, what's going on? Yu Bing finally saw what was going on and asked softly. Chen Tian and the others came to a realization no wonder Ziyu's moves looked so familiar. They were the moves of the ancient sects, but they were all mixed together, so it didn't look like they belonged to the same sect. As you can see, it's a mixed version of the ancient sect's counter moves. Linyi smiled. This was something he'd come up with just for Ziyu, since she'd shown that she was a test addict. Getting her to use a counter move on the spot like the others was a very hard thing to do, and so he came up with this idea. He didn't need to think too much about it, he just needed to use all the moves in the sparring, and it'd be much easier that way. But is this going to work? Lingshan said. Confused Ziyu did seem to be able to scare the opponent, but she didn't hurt him at all. She'd be seen through sooner or later anyway, and this stance was just a waste of chi and stamina. She didn't see any chance of winning at all. Yeah, when you're not as strong as the opponent, it's very easy to see through Ziyu's moves, so you have to defend and counterattack. Isn't that what you taught us, boss? Chen Tian said. That's normal, but take a good look at Ziyu's movements. Linyi reminded. Everyone looked closely at Ziyu's performance, and Yu Bing reacted after a while. She seems to be lowering the power of her moves to increase her speed. More accurately, she has no choice but to lower the power of her moves. That's right. As the saying goes, there's nothing that can't be defeated by speed. Speed doesn't just refer to the speed of one's movements, but also the speed of one's attacks. When the speed of one's attacks reaches a certain level, the opponent won't be able to react in time, achieving the goal of attacking instead of defending. So, I taught her a whole new fighting style, Instant Strike. Chapter 5202. Instant Strike. Everyone was shocked. Yes, it's a fighting style that ignores everything else and focuses on speed. Once you get caught up in a fight like this, you won't be able to fight back normally. You'll only be able to attack halfway and the opponent will have already attacked. Linyi said. Wow, that sounds really strong. Everyone was shocked, but then they started complaining. Boss is too biased, isn't he? He's only teaching Ziyu something this strong and not us. Haha, I can teach you anytime if you want, but it's just a fighting style. It's not suitable for everyone. Lin Yi said as he looked at Ziyu. He didn't know much about the others, but this girl's speed was surprisingly fast, as if she was born for instant strike. The two were still fighting, and it was as Lin Yi said, Luo Shosheng was completely locked down by Ziyu. His life-killer blade couldn't unleash its full power when he was in close range, and Ziyu was using a close-range instant attack. Even if it was just a fledgling form, it was enough to catch someone off guard for a Foundation establishment practitioner like that. Instant strike really is effective. That guy can't find a chance to fight back at all. He's really being led by the nose. Chen Tian's eyes lit up. Yu Bing, however, still frowned. That's true, but Ziyu isn't really threatening him yet. He'll run out of stamina soon, won't he? Instant strike is a fighting style that allows you to gain the upper hand as long as you're in close range, but the downside is that each attack will be greatly weakened, and the stamina and chi will be used up quickly. It's not suitable for a long fight. Lin Yi said. Doesn't that mean Ziyu's in danger? Lingshan said worriedly. You're wrong. I suddenly realized that Ziyu has a very strong trait yesterday, very suitable for instant strike. You'll understand if you keep watching. Lin Yi smiled mysteriously. A very strong trait. Everyone paused, staring at Ziyu's performance. They didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but slowly, their faces changed. This fight had been going on for the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, and with Ziyu's speed, she shouldn't be able to hold on much longer. Her attacks should be slowing down, but she was acting the exact opposite. Not only that, but from Luo Shasheng's movements, his attacks were much stronger than before. How could that be? Everyone was puzzled. The more he fights, the stronger he gets. Ziyu seems to have this type of constitution. Lin Yi explained with a smile. Normal people would get weaker and weaker as they used up their stamina, but there was a type of person who could unleash strength far beyond normal. Ziyu looked weak and petite, but she had this kind of strong body. It wasn't a coincidence that she was a delinquent girl in the past. It was in her genes. A constitution that can unleash strength in the later stages. Everyone was shocked. Just when they were shocked, the fight had reached its climax. As Ziyu's attacks got faster and faster, her attacks got stronger and stronger, and Luo Shosheng, who had been on the defensive all this time, was starting to lose his strength. In just a short period of time, he'd already been hit 5 times. Even though his protective Jin Qi had blocked most of the power, he had still accumulated quite a bit of damage from being hit by the consecutive attacks. At this moment, he was already slightly injured. Even though the injury was not serious, it had more or less affected his movements. This was the start of a vicious cycle. It looks like the result will be out soon. Shin Yijie nodded, a little surprised. The situation was clear now. Ziyu's unexpected performance had given her the upper hand, and if Luo Shosheng didn't bring out a powerful counterattack, the battle would be over soon. Luo Shosheng was well aware of this fact. Unfortunately, this was the first time he had seen a close-range instantaneous attack. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Facing such a fast-paced close-range attack, he couldn't even use a complete move, let alone counterattack. To be defeated by a weak little girl, how could such a stupid thing happen to me? Seeing that he was being forced into a corner step by step, Luo Shosheng was finally ready to risk everything. Lin Yi's lips curled up at this. Close-range attack was a very strong fighting style, but it wasn't invincible. As long as he chose the right strategy, he'd be able to deal with it. There were 2 things he needed to do in order to deal with a close-range attack. 1, he couldn't let the opponent get close to him easily, and 2, he had to open up the distance as soon as the opponent got close, even if he had to pay the price of getting hurt. However, Luo Shosheng didn't do these 2 things at all. He didn't even realize that risking everything at this time coincided with the second point. Unfortunately, it was already too late. Without enough patience and means, he could only rely on a moment of desperation to break through. Close combat, a fighting method that was highly respected on Heaven Stage Island, was simply too weak. Xiaosheng didn't think too much in the situation, and used the snow kill style all of a sudden. Ever since he lost to Lingshan in the first round, the weakness of this signature move of the Snowsword School was known to everyone, and so he had to be extremely careful every time he used it, or he'd be countered easily. The spectators were speechless. All Ziyu had to do now was attack his throat, the obvious opening, and the fight would be over. This wasn't an easy thing to do under normal circumstances, but with Ziyu's close-range skills, seizing the opportunity was a piece of cake. But Ziyu didn't seem to care at all, continuing her rhythm, attacking all parts of Luo Xiaosheng's body, except the throat. This little girl actually saw through it. Instead of being happy, Luo Xiaosheng was shocked. His desperate move was just a facade. He wanted to use the snow-killing style to bait his opponent. In fact, he did not intend to use the snow-killing style at all. From the moment he started to use it, he was ready to change his move. Chapter 5203. As for whether or not Ziyu herself noticed it, that wasn't certain. But even if she didn't, she wouldn't care. After all, she was the type that focused on controlling the initiative. Even if it meant missing the opponent's opening, she couldn't follow the opponent's rhythm unless she had absolute confidence in killing them in one hit. This was the first rule Lin Yi emphasized when he taught her how to do it. Bam! Just as Luo Xiaosheng was playing around, Ziyu's barrage of attacks knocked him down on the ground. Even so, she didn't stop, continuing her attacks on him without any intention of holding back. Ooh! How cruel! Everyone's eyelids twitched. As long as Luo Xiaosheng didn't admit defeat or faint, the battle wasn't over yet. Even if he was knocked down, he could still chase after him. But normally, people would stop when the fight was over, and it was rare to see someone like Ziyu chasing after him. Even Lin Yi and the others felt a chill running down their spine as expected. Ziyu was a ruthless person deep down in her bones. After a while, he looked at Luo Xiaosheng, who was about to be beaten to death without a chance to fight back, and Shinijie couldn't watch it anymore. Alright, this duel ends here. I declare Ziyu the winner, and Luo Xiaosheng 1 win, 3 losses. He's eliminated. Ah, that's it. Ziyu pulled her hand back, still looking like she hadn't had enough yet. That's enough, save some strength for the next round. Lin Yi couldn't help but sweat as he looked at the pitiful Luo Xiaosheng on the ground. Meeting an opponent like Ziyu really was the worst thing he'd ever experienced in his life. Alright, but Lin Yi bro, the close-range attack you taught me is really good. I feel like I'm burning up, I can't stop. Ziyu hugged Lin Yi's arm excitedly. Everyone smiled when they heard this. This was probably not the effect of the instant close-range attack, but purely due to her own special physique. Ziyu's victory was a good start for everyone, and Yu Bing, Xiaobo, and the others all passed as expected. They all got the right to enter the Archean trials with 3 wins and 1 loss. With this, Lin Yi's group only had 2 people left to fight in the 5th round, Ziyu and Cooled. But with Ziyu's current condition, there shouldn't be anything to worry about in the next round. At least at the foundation establishment level, close-range attack was a very troublesome way of fighting. Most people wouldn't be able to react in time, and without the guidance of a master, no one would be able to block Ziyu's close-range attack. Right now, Leng Leng was the one who was a little worried. Although she was very strong now, not only did she possess the shattered ice physique, but she had also developed a powerful move such as prison drawing. She had just advanced to the foundation perfected stage. At the same time, she was facing the predicament of insufficient vital energy. If she could not recover in time, she might repeat the mistakes of the 4th round. That would be troublesome. Lin Yi bro, why don't you give Cooled Sis a private training session too? Wouldn't that be great? Ziyu suggested. She was a living example, and with Lin Yi's level and judgment, the effect of a private training was unquestionable. Sure. Lin Yi nodded and turned to look at Leng Leng. Based on the current situation, there's still a lot of room for improvement, whether it's prison formation or other aspects. We should be able to gain something with targeted special training. What do you think? That. Cooled hesitated and shook her head firmly. Don't bite off more than you can chew. I haven't even stabilized my foundation establishment level yet, and I haven't mastered ground prison yet, so I think we should leave the training for later. This time, I want to overcome it with my own hard work. Alright then, I believe you. Good luck. Lin Yi patted her shoulder lightly. Although it was a little risky to do so, he felt very gratified. Just like what Gould had said, it was better not to bite off more than one could chew. It was commendable for her to realize this. In the 5th round of the trial, no one chose to challenge someone of a higher level. After all, those who stayed until this round were disciples who had gone through 4 rounds of intense battles, with 2 wins and 2 losses. There was no room for accidents anymore. Instead of choosing to challenge someone of a higher level, they might as well participate in the 5th round. At least this way, the difficulty would be lower, and they would have a higher chance of qualifying for the archaic trial. There were only 4 foundation establishment level complete practitioners left, and when Shin Yijie drew out the first group, everyone was shocked. Their eyes focused on the 2 in the field, Gould against Duanmu Yu. Oh, looks like I've gotten myself into a good show. Xue Jianfeng smiled with great interest. After a few days of recuperation, the frostbite left by Gould's extreme version of confinement prison had completely healed. However, because of this, he couldn't be present to supervise the battle these few days. Hence, he couldn't specifically target Lin Yi's group. Otherwise, they wouldn't have passed so smoothly. Fortunately, the result of the draw did not disappoint him. Although he had to admit that Gould's strength was indeed not to be underestimated, especially that prison drawing was even more shocking. It was difficult for an average master of the same level to contend against it. However, Duan Muyu was not an ordinary character. Moreover, from the previous match, Gould's condition was not considered good. The odds of winning against Duan Muyu in this match was not high. If Duan Muyu could eliminate Gould, although it was barely satisfactory for Xue Jianfeng, it could be considered as a consolation. At this moment, not only Xue Jianfeng, but the rest of the crowd also revealed an expression of watching a good show. After all, this was a rare showdown. Both sides were the hot topic, especially since this was the final showdown. No matter what the result was, one side was bound to be eliminated on the spot. Who would it be? Please. Gould took the lead and bowed slightly to Duan Muyu. Please. Duan Muyu, on the other hand, made a gesture of invitation. She looked calm and composed on the surface, but she was secretly on guard in her heart. She warned herself that no matter what, she could not let the opponent use the painted confinement. Even Xue Jianfeng, a beginner stage gold core expert, almost suffered a calamity. If she was the one trapped, then everything would be over. After the greeting, the atmosphere in the field suddenly began to become extremely tense. The crowd at the side did not even dare to breathe, quietly waiting for the 2 to officially start.